Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back. Let me call the meeting to order. Let me remind also witnesses, you're still under oath. Minister Shanmugam.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Milner. And the others, sorry. Thank you. We'll try and move as quickly as we can, just a few points, a number of points. I want to look at how your algorithm works, not in great detail, but just summarize a few points. I'm looking at a Facebook study from 2015. And can we have that study on the screen, please? The relevant passage. This study seems to show that newsfeed algorithm decreases ideologically diverse, cross-cutting content that users see. I mean, in layperson's language, the way I understand it, Facebook pushes the content that users want to see. Would that be accurate?
Yes, we try and provide the most relevant content that people will interact with at the top of the newsfeed.
Right. Second, another article, this time from February 12, 2018, from Wired, headed Inside the 2 Years That Shook Facebook and the World. This is on the Gizmodo expose of May 2016, that the people working behind Facebook's trending topics feed routinely suppressed conservative news. This reporting was based on information leaked to Gizmodo. But essentially what you have now done is replaced that with algorithms.
That's my understanding, but I would have to come back to you to be absolutely sure, because it's not a part of our product that I'm really as deeply familiar with as newsfeed.
All right. Then this Guardian article, which I'm sure you're familiar with, on 22nd of January. Facebook admits to being too slow to recognize Russian election interference. That would be an accurate statement of Facebook's views.
Can you show me the article?
Yes. The heading? I'm sorry. We were too slow to recognize our corrosive effect on democracy. And then in the text of the article, if you look at the first line, Facebook has admitted to being too slow to recognize Russian election interference.
So that's a blog post by my colleague, Samir Chakrabarti. It's on its face, he says what he said, right? So, the Guardian of... I'm not sure what you're asking me to do, to say, is what Mr. Chakrabarti says right? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, slightly easier than that. Does that represent Facebook's view?
Mr. Chakrabarti's blog post does.
Thank you. Now, I now want to take you through some of the articles which have been critical about Facebook, which I'm sure you looked at carefully. Bloomberg article, November of 2017. Let's get that article out. Facebook, the heading is Facebook is still in denial about fake news. Bloomberg criticized how Facebook would use the testimony, I think they're referring to the testimony before the US Senate, as an attempt to cast the stunning number of people reached by IRA's misinformation campaign, 126 million people, as just being a drop in the vast Facebook ocean. Now, the sort of approach saying, well, this is only a small number, I think you would say that approach has changed now?
No, I wouldn't. I stand by what Mr. Stretch said in his evidence to the committee. This is a journalistic interpretation of that, but I stand by exactly what Mr. Stretch said to the committee. And that evidence is available to you and everyone else to read.
It is available to us to read, but I may have to press you a little bit. I know your colleague kept saying to the UK Parliament referred to Mr. Street's evidence. But I think the fact that that evidence is there surely makes it easier for you to confirm certain things to me, preferably yes or no. But if you don't like that, then, with some additions. The question here, though, is a simple one. They're all simple questions. The characterization of 126 million people being reached as a drop in the vast Facebook ocean may be technically correct because there are just 2 billion users and there are many posts. But your own Facebook's approach to the misinformation campaign, may I suggest, has to be slightly different from a dismissive one of saying this is just a small, tiny drop. Would you agree or disagree?
We have not been dismissive.
So in your view, saying drop in the vast Facebook ocean is factually correct, but do you think it conveys a certain dismissiveness beyond being factually correct?
I do not. With respect, you have to look at the evidence as a whole, not to pick out a single phrase and suggest that that is dismissive.
And you wouldn't agree with Bloomberg's characterization?
Correct.
Correct meaning you
I answered your question. I wouldn't agree with their characterization.
Thank you. Because the answer you gave could have been ambiguous later on.
I definitely don't want that to be the case.
Thank you. Now, the criticism that Bloomberg makes for trying to make the volume of the Russian propaganda look very small compared to the overall stream of Facebook content, you reject that criticism as well?
I think anybody reading the whole of Mr. Stretch's evidence, for them to conclude that Facebook is somehow belittling or dismissing this or trying to suggest it's not important, I don't think any reasonable person could conclude that.
All right. Let's look at certainly a very reasonable person, Senator Mark Warner, 31st October 2017. Senator Mark Warner isn't sure that Facebook, Google, and Twitter have fully uncovered the scope of Russian election meddling. He says that he's not sure that the tech industry even did the fullest accounting of Russia's disinformation efforts on their platforms. Has that been done now? That's capable of a yes or no answer.
Well, we've made clear we're continuing our investigations.
It's not completed?
We've made clear we're continuing investigations.
Right. Let's explore that a little bit more. I'll come back to that. Another article, October 31, TechCrunch. It says, Stretch, along with counsel from both Twitter and Google, were criticized as being non-committal in some of their answers, including on the issue of banning foreign currency in political ads. Would you accept that as an accurate characterization?
I'd actually like to speak to the chair at this point. I'm not certain that this is a fair use of this committee's time. Unfair to ask me about this. This committee is looking into the issue of deliberate online falsehoods here in Singapore. Myself and my colleague and other people on this panel have come here prepared to answer questions of that and to help the committee understand it. I don't think it's fair to ask me detailed questions about evidence given by my colleague to a different parliament in a different country about activities associated with that country. And I really would like the chairman to consider whether this line of questioning is appropriate.
Yep. Okay. You want to say something?
I will explain to you why. Obviously, the 15-minute break has helped you decide whether you will or will not answer the questions and the reasons why.
That's genuinely not what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to understand why we are not talking about the issues about Singapore, about deliberate online falsehoods here, about what our companies are doing about this, and instead you wish to discuss evidence given by my colleague to a parliament, to a really long, in fact, 3 long sessions in the US Congress to ask me detailed questions about exactly what was said. I do not think that's a good use of our time. I really respectfully suggest. And that is not because I don't want to answer your questions.
Mr.
I'm
Milner,
just, if you want to get to something, get to it. And then let's have other people answer some questions.
Mr. Milner, I think you should leave it to us to decide what is relevant, what is not relevant. But if you're unable to answer questions because you don't know or do not wish to answer the question, please state so. All right?
Thank you.
Let me explain to you why this is very relevant, Mr. Milner. I spent most of my career looking at what's relevant and irrelevant. The questions before the UK Parliament were very relevant in exploring the degree to which you can be trusted. Facebook can be trusted to answer questions when asked. Facebook can be trusted to be a reliable partner, that a government of Singapore can depend on Facebook to tell us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in proceedings where the witnesses are sworn, or whether you will do everything you can to give lawyers' answers or lawyered answers. And as I told you earlier, one looks at the sequence of conduct from 2015 to 2018, and the very first time you accepted responsibility for Cambridge Analytica publicly, when did that happen? And why did that not happen earlier? And to what extent can we take seriously all these protestations that you can be completely trusted to apply your internal guidelines? It's very relevant. And if you thought that you could turn up here today, not answer questions on Cambridge Analytica, and explain your answers today with your answers less than 5 weeks ago to a different parliament, we are all sovereign parliaments, but we look at your conduct all around the world, and we have to understand. Second, why are we looking at these answers? We are looking at our national security, the consequences we have. By looking at your answers elsewhere, it's clear, and you have confirmed, you will not decide on whether something is true or false. You will not take down something simply because it is false. You will take it down if there is a legal obligation on you. And your argument, up to very recently, through the written representations, through the public statements, through all public positions that you have taken, in essence, is that you will prefer to be regulating yourself with your internal guidelines. That's my sense of it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And that you do not want to be regulated. In that context, we are asking you these questions. If you are embarrassed about being confronted with answers that your colleagues have given to other parliaments, you can say so. If you feel unable to support them, of course you can say so. But I think you will leave the relevance of the questions to me, and for me to be directed by the chair. Can we move on? I don't need an answer from you.
I think you should move on.
The reason for asking your comments on Senator Mark Warner's comments is very simple. The same thing can happen in Singapore, a serious foreign interference. This is a very senior legislator in the United States. He makes these comments after listening to your very senior colleague, who I assume, or who would have been expected to have been helpful to the American Congress and the American people. And we know our position as Singapore in the world. We are not the United States of America. If a very senior legislator in the United States feels that you're not being cooperative, then how do we expect that you will be cooperative with us? But these are issues that we are entitled to explore. So now you understand why some of these questions are being asked. You may not like them, you may not want to answer them, but there is a reason why we are asking, and everything is related to the impact deliberate online falsehoods can have on us. To what extent can we rely on you being voluntarily helpful? To what extent can we rely on your actions being helpful? To what extent does the government have to intervene? And that really depends on an assessment of what you do elsewhere in the world. And what other people, particularly senior people, journalists, newspaper articles, have said about your conduct is highly relevant. Let's move on. Stretch, along with counsel from Twitter and Google, were criticized as being non-committal in some of their answers, including on the issue of banning foreign currency in political ads. By the way, I don't know if you know our laws. We do not allow foreign interference in our elections. So this is a very relevant point for us. And I want to understand from you whether you have any comment on this suggestion. And the reason your comment will be important is this. If you are dismissive, that tells us something. If you are serious about it, and if you show that you are serious in dealing with this problem there, that also tells us something. Please go ahead.
And the question is?
The question is, what is your comment on this criticism that Mr. Stretch was non-committal on his answers, some of his answers, including on the issue of banning foreign currency in political ads?
Mr. Warner's entitled to his view. As a company, since Mr. Stretch gave evidence, our CEO and founder has laid out a very clear plan of action of what we are going to do as a company to help to address the understandable concerns about the integrity of elections around the globe, including here in Singapore. In today's interview with CNN that you referred to earlier, he talked explicitly about concerns about the US midterm elections, but also he talked about elections in India and in Brazil. So we know we have a global responsibility to do what we can to try to protect the abuse, to try and prevent the abuse of our platform in terms of undermining the integrity of elections. And that includes working with national authorities, both, as it were, in public and behind the scenes, because much of this work has to be done behind the scenes when it comes to cybersecurity, to do what we can to try and prevent what happened in the US election of 2016, to prevent that happening again on our platform.
Thank you. Now, have you now a policy to ban foreign currency payments for political advertisements?
We have a policy of complete transparency when it comes to political advertising,
Milner,
but we do not
insist.
yet. I'm happy to answer if you'd let me.
Yes.
We do not as yet have that policy.
Right. Again, remember I told you we have to judge by actions, not just statements.
I understand.
So as of now, despite the criticism in the United States, you do not ban foreign currency payments for political advertisements.
One of the problems here...
It's capable of a yes or no answer.
Well, it is, but I also want to explain why. Actually defining
Maybe
what
you give the
constitutes...
answer and then explain.
Would you mind? The answer is yes, we don't.
Thank you.
But the reason for that, one of the reasons for that is it's actually really difficult to define what is a political ad. Most of the ads in the case of the US may not have been classified as political ads under the jurisdiction there because they did not endorse a candidate. So one of the questions really for us and for you as legislators is what constitutes political advertising? So it's not because we don't want to try to address the issue, it's just it's actually not simple.
So if we defined what is a political ad for you, then you will do it?
I think that's something, I can't be definitive on that, I'm sorry, but it's definitely one of the things that we're looking to see how we can help to protect the integrity of elections when it comes to abuse of our advertising platform. Remember, this was not just about ads.
Now, on the same vein in this article. Can you look at it, please? We'll put it up. It was said that all three tech companies were cooperative but not particularly helpful, opting to mostly cover themselves with pre-planned statements.
I'm afraid I can't actually see that.
I'm reading it out to you, they will put it out. The idea is to not let you see it.
Can we also see where, I think you told us where the article was from, so
This
it'd
is-
be helpful to understand that.
TechCrunch,
In
31st October 2017.
Thank you.
Can we have that back again, please? I'm sorry, give us a few minutes. We'll put it up. Yes. It was stated that all three tech companies were cooperative but not particularly helpful, opting to mostly cover themselves with pre-planned statements and platform reports designed to appease lawmakers and stave off regulation. Would you accept that characterization or reject it?
No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. It was also reported how Mr. Stretch floundered under direct questioning by Senator Franken over how Facebook could have been accepted for political ads in Russian rubles during the elections without connecting the dots to Russian interference. Would you accept that characterization or reject it?
I'm struggling here. I mean,
Okay.
I don't understand what are you looking for me to do, to agree with a journalist that's been critical of my colleagues? Is that what you want me to do?
I want to try and understand what is your sense of what happened. And this is one characterization of what happened. If you accept it, fine. If you don't, just tell us, and we'll move on. I'm not going to press you to accept it.
Let's move on then.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Why don't we move on then if you're not going to press me to accept it?
But so can I take it that you don't accept it?
I'm at a loss. This is one journalist's view of what happened.
I understand. You are perfectly welcome to reject it.
Perhaps we could read the whole piece, because I noticed at the top it says with mixed results. Maybe we read the bits where the journalist says they did it really well
I'll
here.
give you a few minutes. They will put it up and you can read it. And then you can answer the question. Wouldn't take you very long. There it is.
Actually, why don't we save your colleagues' time? I'm very happy, for the record, to say I disagree.
Thank you. Now, there is this is the next article I'm going to refer you to deals with disinformation campaigns, payments, and how measures may not be, measures which are being rolled out may not be able to prevent it. So let's look at another Bloomberg article, February 17, last month. Facebook, Twitter ill-equipped to stop repeat of 2016 meddling. Indictment details how sophisticated the Russian disinformation campaign was in using falsified paperwork and stolen bank numbers to hide their real identities, and opened PayPal accounts to buy ads on popular social media sites. The measures being rolled out by the tech companies will not be able to prevent this, since they do not address the issues posed by identity theft at all. Others may have bought or will buy ads using stolen identities. System can be easily gamed. Your comments on this?
Actually, I would refer you to what my CEO said on the CNN interview about this,
Right.
which is people probably are trying to meddle using our platform. We're taking steps to try and address it. Will we win? We're going to try.
Right.
I think, again, this is it's one person's interpretation. Clearly, we wouldn't be, and also it's not just about Facebook, it's also about another company here.
I know the
but we are
responsibility is shared.
Absolutely, and we're really endeavouring to try and prevent that. But are we going to be able to guarantee, much like you as lawmakers and your law enforcement authorities can't guarantee that you can always ensure that the citizens of Singapore will be safe, but you do everything you can to try, and that's exactly what we are doing as a company.
Okay. Again, you can see why this is important, to explore this and understand.
I do understand, and I apologize if I was intemperate earlier. I just would think it would be great to hear from other people, both up here and down here.
Well, Mr. Milner, we do intend to ask the others some questions.
Great.
But I may have to disappoint you. It may not be me. It might be some of my colleagues.
Well, I think we both need a rest.
So let's move on because we have serious work to do. What concerns me is this point that the measures will not address the issues posed by identity theft at all. And people can buy advertisements using stolen identities, and the system can be easily gamed. Anything you can say directly to
Yes,
that
I can.
will be helpful.
Absolutely. So, for instance, when it comes to transparency, and that's a big part of what all of us are concerned about here, you will see a greater level of transparency about advertising on Facebook than there has ever been on any advertising platform anywhere in the world. We're already trialing this in Canada. We'll be using it in the midterm elections in the US, and it will be available globally. So you will be, and that will be by shining a spotlight, we know that that's often the best antidote to malfeasance and bad behavior, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. That will have a determined impact on people who attempt to impersonate others, steal identities, etc.
I think this has been explored elsewhere. They may be sitting outside of Singapore, and the transparency will not tell us where they are sitting necessarily.
Actually, it will, because we will be requiring page owners and admins to provide, particularly for political advertising, this has already been announced, we will be requiring them to verify their details, not just by ticking a box, but actually using old-fashioned mail, to requiring them to do that. And that will be one of the ways in which we aim to protect the integrity of elections. But just to be clear, we don't think that, as it were, that one thing alone is enough. This is, as you and others have explained in this group, this is a multifaceted problem. We need a multifaceted solution. It needs to be done in the spirit of cooperation, where there is trust between governments, companies, civil society, and others. And we know we have a job to do to rebuild trust. My understanding from my colleague, Mr. Tan, here is that actually there are high levels of trust between our company and this government and this country, and we want to, but we can understand why you may feel, have we made the wrong call here? You haven't. You can trust our company, and we will demonstrate to you that trust time and again over the coming months.
Thank you. Making up for the short answers you gave to the UK Parliament, I think.
But you did point out that some of my answers were very long to the UK Parliament.
Now, can I ask you to help me with one point? You said earlier in answer to the question on banning foreign currency payments for political advertisements that it's very difficult to define political advertisements. So how are you going to define them for purposes of this exercise?
Oh, but just to be clear, our transparency exercise will be up for all advertising.
I understand.
But I do take your point. I feel that if you don't mind, I'd like to give you something in writing which explains the point I was raising about this kind of mailed verification process.
But do you see a contradiction between the two answers?
No, I don't see the contradiction, but I can understand why you're trying to figure out, well, okay, how does this work?
Let me explain.
So I understand the issue, and I feel I probably cannot give you further erudition on that, but we will do so in writing.
I do need to explore it a little bit with you, because I was quite focused on trying to find out why you can't ban foreign currency payments for political advertisements? And the answer was because we can't define what political advertisements are. Now you're telling me when it comes to transparency and people identifying where they are from, that political advertisements you will be able to identify.
So in respect of, as I understand it, but as I say, I do want to, write to you about this. This is in respect of advertising in support of particular candidates and particular parties. So things which everybody
So why
would
can't you do the same for
everybody would agree
foreign
that is
currency
political
payments?
advertising, but in respect of the majority of the advertising conducted by these Internet Research Agency accounts, it was not of that type. And so that's the issue. So we don't, I think there's a danger that, rather like we've talked in other areas, there's a danger where I say, it's fine, we've got this. We're just going to focus on ads that particularly mention a candidate or a party. We'll just focus on that and it will all be fine. And I think you would say, well, that's not good enough. You need to go further than that. So that's,
Mr. Milner,
that's at the heart of this, I'd suggest.
We have a problem here, and you can't have it both ways. Let me try and understand. If you are able to identify political advertisements narrowly defined for candidates and so on, then you can use the same definition to ban foreign currency payments in respect of those advertisements.
Yeah,
Why would you not do that?
I agree. We can take actions to ensure that the only people who can advertise that kind of content are based in the country concerned.
And at this stage, you haven't done that.
We haven't done that yet, but I very much expect that will be part of the range of things that we do in order to preserve the integrity. Where indeed that is the national law, and it's not necessarily the national law everywhere.
So banning foreign currency payments for political advertisements is something you're perfectly willing to consider.
Yes.
Thank you. We could have gotten that much earlier.
I think your original question was, do you have that policy now? Not, are you willing to consider it? So if you'd asked me that question earlier, I may be able to. Anyway, look, it's in the dim and distant memories of time now.
Well, to say it's not possible precludes asking a further question, are you willing to consider? It's not possible. But actually it is possible.
Narrowly defined.
And that then leaves us with another problem with that political advertisements that do not come within this definition. You can have foreigners placing the advertisements, paying for it, and interfering. I mean, it leaves open that possibility.
It does, but I mean, remember, we also have some international organizations, for instance, human rights organizations, that will often seek to advertise using our platform and to highlight human rights abuses. Not here, I'm talking about many other countries. And
we don't have a problem. They can talk about us
exactly.
through Facebook.
So should we not allow international human rights organizations to place adverts on Facebook during election times in countries? I think that's a really interesting question to debate among society everywhere about what's a reasonable level of political discourse that we want to have both as a nation and also as part of an international community. So I just think these things need a lot. They need a lot of thought, you need a lot of evidence, you need to really consider the consequences, as indeed you are, the consequences of alternative approaches.
Let's look at a New York Times article, 17th of February. It says that one of the key characteristics of advertising on Facebook is that it allows ads to be targeted and to show how widespread an ad becomes. The amendments to the advertising policy do not change this. These advertising tools were incredibly effective tools which allowed Russia to profile citizens in the US to figure out how to manipulate them. Again, you can understand our concerns. We are not the arbiters of truth on this article, but I would like your comments.
You want
For
a yes,
our
no, or?
purposes.
Look, our advertising tools are amazingly powerful. That's correct.
Thank you. So there is a follow-up comment, which I think Facebook essentially gave them, meaning the Russians, what they needed to do that, and these tools continue to pervade Facebook. I assume your earlier answer stands.
These tools continue to be incredibly powerful for small businesses, large organizations, governments, international organizations to target their advertising in a really relevant and effective way.
Okay. We move on to some comments by Claire Waddell. I'm sure you're aware of her. AIC, Mr. Payne's representation, quotes her as one of the world's leading experts on user-generated content. I haven't done with you yet, Mr. Milner. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Milner, whether you accept that characterization that AIC has put.
In all the mirth, I forgot what your question was. I do
Yes.
apologize. I'm sure, given that we are members of AIC, that I
You will-
fully agree with all the representations they have made in their submission.
He says that Dr. Waddell is one of the world's leading experts on user-generated content.
I've only just met Mr. Payne, but I can already tell he's an authority on these things, and I
Right.
completely agree with everything in that
Thank
submission.
you. Now, this is what she said to the UK Fake News Inquiry Committee. This is what she said to the UK Fake News Inquiry Committee on the 8th of February, the same day you were there. Question 577. That's just to tell you that I've read all the questions. Now, social media companies have said they want to be part of the conversation, but Waddell expressed before the UK Parliamentary Committee that she has not seen them come up with potential solutions. I would like your comments on that.
I'd like to understand the context, because it's hard to tell just from Mr. Hart's question what the context is that she's been asked to comment on.
Well, let me put the context to you. Maybe you listen to the question.
I did.
Social media companies have said, so you don't even need to look at what she says.
But part of the conversation's about what?
Let me explain. Social media companies have said they want to be part of the conversation, but Waddell expressed before the UK Parliamentary Committee that she has not seen them come up with potential solutions. Part of the conversation on how to deal with fake news and falsehoods and other such matters. Now, she seems to be saying that you have not come up with potential solutions. All I want to understand from you is what is your view on that comment?
Exactly the same as it was before, which is I don't understand the context. I mean, this could be, for instance, an issue about, whether young people know how to find fake news. It could be about the future of the news industry. I just don't know.
I think it's quite clear.
It's
but
not.
we'll move on.
Actually, it's not clear, is it?
Okay. Let's move on, Mr.
No, please explain to me what this was about. What was it about? What's she talking about?
Mr. Milner, I'll come back to it if necessary.
Thank you.
I will just say that I've asked the question. We have your answer on the record. We will leave it at that.
Fine.
She says, lack of transparency around promoted content on social platforms and search companies makes it impossible to know which campaigns have been undertaken on a platform and who paid for those campaigns in real time. In this environment, it is much easier for systematic manipulation to occur. Is that a comment you will agree with?
Yes, and that's why we're taking the actions we are.
Thank you. Mr. Stretch, in his answers before the Senate Intelligence Committee, he says it is difficult and controversial to define what false news, hyperpartisan news content is. As such, it has not even been able to estimate how much of this material is even disseminated on its site. That's an accurate comment.
Yes, Mr. Stretch
Thank you.
said that.
Ms. Waddell again, currently technology companies are not equipped nor sufficiently aware of the threats and techniques used by agents of disinformation, example, manufactured amplification, automated accounts including bot networks, groups of people paid to act as bots, reposting or resharing technology, moving content across networks automatically, etc. Would you agree with that comment?
I find this really hard because she's not talking about Facebook particularly,
No.
and therefore it's very difficult for me to give an answer on behalf of the whole industry. Look, she's an expert. She's entitled to her view. Are we as good at this as we should be? No. Are we investing? Are we growing our teams? Are we growing our expertise? Are we learning every time we address these issues? Yes. But Ms. Wardle is clearly entitled to her own opinion.
What if?
But I'd suggest that means we are not addressing the issue, incompetent. It's just not fair.
That's not being suggested. I think restricting the question to Facebook, if I were to say it this way, currently Facebook is not equipped nor sufficiently aware of the threats and techniques used by agents of disinformation, reposting or resharing technology, moving content across networks automatically. If that were to be her comment, would you agree?
I would disagree. Because we can furnish you, I think we already have furnished you with a paper that Facebook published in February of 2017, all about information operations and how this works, the kind of way we see it on our platform. We published that. That is not the actions of a company that doesn't know what's going on.
I think the phrase she uses is not that you are completely unaware, not that you're doing nothing, but not sufficiently aware.
We'd like to be more aware.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Stretch, this is more to remind ourselves, tech companies have a challenge attributing online activities to specific governments or organizations. This is widely recognized in the intelligence and law enforcement communities. It is extremely difficult to definitively attribute online activity to a particular threat actors, and they often have to rely on information from others to better identify the actors. I don't need to ask you because this is your colleague, but I think that reminds you as to where we are going. A ZNet article, February 16, a particular comment, companies like Facebook and Google insist on relying on algorithms instead of employing editors. They refuse to employ editors because they refuse to acknowledge that they are media companies. They don't want regulations and the social responsibilities of a media company, so they insist on being classified as a technology company. They are trying to hide behind an algorithm. Your comments? And I'll explain to you why I'm asking for the comments.
I disagree.
Thank you. But just so that you don't think this is an exercise in reading out stuff to you, only in the end, if we rely on these comments from these articles, if we take them to be accurate, or if we feel that they concern us, then it would have been unfair to you not to have given an opportunity to you to deal with them. And so now we are giving you an opportunity to comment on them, and we can take your comments together when we are looking at the articles.
And we're happy to respond in writing if you'd prefer to any particular thing you'd like to put to us.
Right.
I do think but just to be, the overall impression, I suggest that the combination of articles and comments is trying to create is that this company doesn't care, isn't doing enough, isn't trying to address, isn't aware, and that's completely contrary to much other evidence which is in the public domain, as well as evidence what we are happy to talk you through to demonstrate as a company we care about these issues, we care about Singapore, as we care about other countries where there are concerns about this, and there are many. And we are investing hugely to address the problem. We are growing the number of people who work on safety and security at Facebook from 10,000 people to 20,000 people by the end of this year. It is the biggest single investment the company is making, is to address these concerns. Our CEO has publicly committed at the beginning of the year, his main focus will be to fix Facebook. We have underinvested in this area, and now we are going to invest hugely in it. So to suggest that those combination of articles, I agree. If you were just to read all those articles, I'd be really worried about Facebook if I just read those articles. But please don't just read articles like that. Also read our evidence, read the information operations paper, read the whole of Mr. Stretch's evidence to that committee, read the commitments by our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, and then tell me you don't care. Because I can't imagine any reasonable person who could read all of that and conclude that that we can't work with, trust this company.
This is how I'll put it, Mr. Milner. The articles that I'm showing you are a small cross-section of a very large number of articles that we have put together. However, the reason for taking you through them, I've explained, because they do raise very serious concerns. And it's not just the articles, it's the experts we have either interviewed or who have put in written representations, including Dr. Waddell, whom AIC agrees is a world-class expert. So we have to take these views very seriously. We have to take very seriously the views that were presented by your colleagues and yourself in other parliaments, what has happened elsewhere, and we have to look very carefully at your actions. Where we are coming from is not to characterize Facebook or any of the other tech companies as, to use the phrase that one of the UK parliamentarians used, commercial prostitutes. That's not our approach. Nor is it that we think you are saints or a church-like organization. You are a commercial organization that is profit-driven, and you want to make profits, which is not a bad thing. And in the process, if you can do some good, you will want to do some good as well. I'm giving you my personal reflection of this. And we all now have a problem. We have had this problem for some time. It's becoming bigger and bigger. Many countries in the world are looking at the problem. From a very Singaporean perspective, we do not have the levers that, say, the US government has, or a much larger government in Europe might have. But from our perspective, we want you, all of you, to succeed. We want all of you to continue to make money. We want all of you to do well in Singapore. We see you as partners, but do not accept that, some characterizations of what you think you can do, or when I say we do not accept, some of us may not accept it, and some areas are of concern, and we need to explore them very carefully. And if the questioning is a bit uncomfortable, I apologize for that. But I hope I have set out what we think of tech companies in Singapore. That's our approach. We look at you as partners. And we want to treat you as partners.
I appreciate hearing that.
And we want to work with you to find a solution. But in the course of the hearing and in the course of writing our report, we will have to identify what it is that you will be able to do, what is it that we think you will not be able to do. And it would not be proper for us if we hadn't tried at least to give you an opportunity to deal with some of those things that we may have to deal with at the end. So you've got to take it in the context. We are not particularly responsible for the fact that there has been a huge amount of newspaper articles and media articles that Facebook and others have generated. That's simply an indicia of your success. So take it as a compliment, and let's explore the areas where we need to explore.
I really appreciate your comments about being partners, because that's absolutely how we see ourselves.
And I'm sure my colleagues, including those who are not here today, because we have discussed it among some of us, share the views that I've put forward, that you're partners, we want you to succeed. I don't know about my colleagues. Maybe some of them might think that you're saints or you're godlike or that's the UK Parliament
I'm really
use
not.
phrases like that.
Like all of us, we're all sinners, right?
Yes, but nor do we think that you are, you know, you're not to be valued, or that you're commercial prostitutes or whatever. Those are not phrases or ideas that we carry with us. Right? You are not just partners; you're valuable partners, and you're important partners. And we can't do what we want to do without cooperation with you. That's our approach. So bear with me while the questions may appear a bit tough. I took you literally when you said, bring on the hard questions. Yes. Guardian article. This is the article that I showed you earlier on we were too slow to recognize our corrosive effect on democracy, January of this year. I want to check a different point. This article makes a point that you are trialing a new process to remove news content from newsfeed in 6 countries, Guatemala, Cambodia, Slovakia, and so on. So that trial, they use various phrases, downright Orwellian and so on. But the suggestion is that actually resulted in a massive reduction in the amount of trusted news content shared on the site, with little corresponding reduction in low-quality, politically inflammatory memes that still spread like wildfire across the network. Would you be able to give us a comment on that?
Yes, we've now ended that trial. It did not prove to be as effective as we thought it might be, but it was a genuine attempt to say, well, why don't we just take all news out of newsfeed and see if that makes us better? It didn't work.
Okay, thank you.
And it's finished.
Now, if the government has some intelligence, which by its very nature is not something we will go public with, about a foreign country attempting to interfere in our work, and we don't quite do it the way the US government does it, we don't publish these intel reports for a variety of reasons, how do we then go about dealing with that content with you?
So we have colleagues in our office here in Singapore and indeed around the world whose job it is to liaise with authorities in respect of things like this. So we have I won't name him for obvious reasons, but we have a colleague based in our Singapore office who has very good relationships with the Singaporean authorities that might well provide this kind of information to us. And when we get that information, we act on it because it can be incredibly valuable for us to help identify that there's been an attempt to attack our network, undermine the integrity of our community. And we can and will act on that by removing accounts, removing pages, tackling those things. So it's incredibly valuable to us. And that communication is already going on. It's live. If there is something like that, I'm sure if you were to, perhaps in private again, ask the people who lead this for you in this country, do you know who to call in Facebook? They would absolutely tell you that they do.
Right, thank you. Now, let's move on to a topic that's very important for us, which is race and religion. I think I know your answers, given based on what you've told us before, but I just want some confirmations. You were asked some questions on the Ban Islam Now page a while ago, yes. Not so long ago, but anyway. This is a community page reported by the UK Home Affairs Parliamentary Committee to Facebook for being openly Islamophobic. This is in the 14th report of session 2016-2017, paragraph 13. This Facebook page has an anti-Islam agenda. I'm just telling you that. It purports to be a political organization in New York. It calls on people to remove Islam, quote, breaking the bonds of oppression that have shackled and terrorized too many for too long. It has about 18,000 followers. Language used on the page, take it from me, from our perspective, is incendiary, provoking hatred and dislike. So there's one post there up since the 7th of December 2016, which alleges that the Quran commands you to kill gays, stone women who have sex, coerce child brides, kidnap and rape non-Muslim women, general calls for genocide of deviants, dissidents, and unbelievers, and a strict law to murder anyone who leaves this cult. And it declares that human rights and Islam are incompatible. That particular post was engaged with by over 500 people, including 200 shares, and it was shared several times by one account, which had nearly 4,000 followers. And it also got picked up by other groups with similar racial ideological agendas, Scottish page against mass immigration, and a French nationalist page. There is another post up since July 2014. It has an image of a group of men with guns taking aim at another group of people, titled Muslims Gunning Down Other Muslims for Being the Wrong Kind of Muslims. An ideology that persuades minds to murder those who believe even slightly differently, wages war with the whole earth. And it has got some quotes, and I quote, "Are there still any academics, liberals, or others who see no evil miscreants, who cannot see Islam is the Nazi movement of our times?" This page is still available online, though it has stopped making public posts since December 2016. Then there is another page called The Truth About Talmud. Some of it is up there. Community page reported by the UK Home Affairs Parliamentary Committee again. It's a website of the KKK leader David Duke, his website. Has dubious claims like, has a photo of Orthodox Jews with hands linked and dancing. Caption, Talmud adherents celebrate the bombing and murdering of Gentiles in the Gaza Strip. A meme that states 1.3 million American families lost their homes to foreclosure in 2007. Meanwhile, billions of your tax dollars continue to purchase beautiful new homes with subsidized mortgages in Israel. Now, I'm not suggesting that you personally or your organization or any of those organizations sitting at the table subscribe to or accept any of this or find any of this anything other than absolutely unacceptable. Okay, let's get that clear. So my purpose of raising this is slightly different, and I'll come to it in a minute. Another meme that claims a Jewish rabbi has said non-Jews exist to serve Jews, and so on. Now, Facebook's position before the UK Home Affairs Parliamentary Committee was that neither the Ban Islam page that I talked to you about, nor the Truth About Talmud page violated its own community standards. And if you want to see the question, I can take you to it, but you don't need it. Yeah. I just want to understand, I'm not criticizing you, but that remains a current position?
Yes.
Thank you.
As I understand it, I've not looked at these pages recently, but yes.
There are a number of other questions, but that question has been very helpful. I think the same philosophy applies to other posts of a similar nature. Now, essentially, race and religion, you'll understand, Mr. Milner, different countries can have different standards as to what is acceptable. You agree?
Yes.
So, for example, I think the US, you can burn the Quran, the Bible, in the name of free speech. And people have done, certainly they have burned the Quran. But we don't allow that. And if you burnt the Quran or the Bible or any other religious text in Singapore, you will be in jail. Okay? No two questions about it. And I want to share with you an example. There was a pastor, Christian pastor, who was on YouTube, which is, I suppose, somewhat represented, who said to his flock, these Buddhists, they do this chanting, they do this kind of praying, it's all wrong. They are, he made various derogatory remarks about Buddhists in general. Our approach was that the police spoke with him, as a result of which he took down the post, and he apologized And our approach for platforms as well is that any such content will have to be out, and no two ways about it. We had religious leaders here, sitting where you are sitting, who urged us to continue to keep to that approach in Singapore, religiously one of the most diverse places in the world, peaceful, racially, religiously harmonious. And the majority of our citizens support that approach. Now here there is, I think, a contrast in values, because I can perfectly accept Facebook has certain community standards, but those values will not be consistent with our values. And this is something that we need to work together to make sure that, at least in Singapore, our values get reflected. I don't know whether you have any comments on that. Yes, yeah.
I think Mr. Tan would be better on this than me because he is local
Then
and can answer those.
Someone will ask him. Yeah.
Oh, you don't, well, fine. Okay.
You are feeling that
No, it's
there's
just
no
that
equal opportunity.
I do think that Mr. Tan, as a Singaporean, who's lived here all his life, has got more expertise.
Yes.
And he's as expert as me on our community standards and their application,
Right.
but he can also address the specifics of the local context much more effectively than I can.
Right. I was asking you a broader question in the sense that it's not just Singapore. Many countries in the world have different standards.
Yes.
In Turkey, for example, they do not allow you to say anything against the founding leader,
Ataturk, yes.
Ataturk, Ataturk. So, one, you will do it if you are required to do by law, and two, you have the ability to do it if you are required to do by law, correct? Thank you. Now, I want to understand your appetite for more questions on, do you feel like speaking about free speech, or you think we have covered enough ground?
I just feel that it would be great to hear from some other people.
Yes,
So maybe we could, especially given the issue of free speech is hugely important for ourselves and for Twitter
Probably.
and for Google and for the AIC. And it's a broad issue which I'm sure you'd love to hear other people's views on, not just mine and Facebook's.
I will spare you.
Thank you.
We'll reserve it for Google or Twitter. Okay. Now, you are au fait with your written representation?
Sorry, you're back on me. Yes, I am, of course.
Yes, sorry, I haven't left yet. I've just removed a few pages. Yes. You refer to fake accounts. We can take this very shortly.
Sure.
What you mean by fake accounts is very different from what I mean by DOFs, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And I mean, questions like how do you identify hoaxes and so on, we can deal with separately. If we discuss with you the possibility that you, and this has been suggested to the committee last week by a law professor, that you tag certain articles which are believed to be false, we'll come to how we define false separately. But supposing there is some mechanism to define false, or what is false, and instead of taking it down, you are asked to tag it where whoever receives that also receives a notification that there are certain other articles they might want to read that presents no technological challenges for you.
Indeed, we've tried it.
I know that, but I just want on record that it's technically possible.
That's technically possible.
I know there is some perverse.
You know we found it didn't work.
The perverse reaction is that people believe in the falsehood even more. I understand that, but it is something that we are was suggested to us, and I'm just checking with you. Are you able to, I suppose the answer must be yes, demonetize sites which thrive on falsehoods, assuming a proper direction is given?
Indeed, that's what we're doing.
Yes, but, well, you talk about fake news sites,
No, we talk
Oh.
about clickbait sites and
Clickbait.
low-quality sites.
whereas
and,
I'm talking about,
and disrupting the economic model that they have.
right,
That's what we're
I'm
doing.
talking about something slightly different, DOFs, and demonetizing sites that might thrive on DOFs.
Well, I think often these things are the same.
Yes,
So actually, the issues of concern that you have are often associated with very clickbaity sites, and we are taking steps to, to prevent them from advertising on Facebook. And if they can't advertise, they've got no business model.
right. And if you are directed as appropriate under law, you can stop, technically it's possible to stop further transmission of falsehoods.
Technically, we are able to both take down content and to geo-block content, so it's not available in a particular country.
What do you mean by not available?
So if we were to block a piece of content in Singapore, nobody in Singapore, whether they're Singaporean, a tourist, anybody here could see it. And that enables us to respect the jurisdiction of a country and a court in doing so. And it's something that we do thousands of times a year, and we report on it publicly in a twice yearly report, our transparency report, as do the other companies here. We all have the same model.
Thank you, Mr. Milner. You have been very helpful. I'm
Thank
going
you.
to give you your wish and get someone else to ask questions of your colleague.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Mutual. Thank you.
Minister Desmond Lee, you've indicated you want to ask some questions. I do hope you'll direct your questions to the other witnesses who are, by now, I'm sure, are feeling quite left out.
Mr. Chairman, I will ask Mr. Alvin Tan some questions, and then followed by Twitter, Google, and AIC, if you may permit me first to just have a couple of questions from Mr. Milner in order to supplement, no, just 3 questions, yeah, in order to address some concerns I have with regards to the Cambridge Analytica issues that came up front. The first question is, does Facebook know whether Singapore Facebook users' personal information had been inappropriately obtained by Prof.
Alexander Kogan.
Prof. Alexander Kogan, and passed on to Cambridge Analytica? That's my first question.
No, we don't.
That means you don't know.
We don't know.
Okay. And you're you will, in the course of the next few weeks or months, find that out?
That's exactly what we're trying to do. Although, just to recall, we had sent in our forensic auditors, not ours, but a team of forensic auditors into Cambridge Analytica. But we were asked to stand down by the UK regulator, the Information Commission. So at the moment, the Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, we understand, I don't know whether those accountants at the firm are in there, but and she's now conducting her investigation, which limits our ability to do the same.
Okay.
I hope you understand that.
Understand.
It's not for want of
But
trying.
when you know that information, and if any Singapore users are affected,
We will be telling
will
them.
Facebook inform
We
them?
will be
formally?
telling those users.
Thank you. Does Facebook know if any other third-party app, like the one used by Professor Alexander Kogan, is used by Facebook to do roughly the same thing, which is to use information without the user's consent and knowledge?
That's
Are
what
you
we're
aware?
investigating. So that's what Mr. Zuckerberg announced, that we're going to do an audit of all the apps that were live on the platform at the time when this feature were allowed for this. It's really clear that the apps that are currently running on Facebook since we made our policy change, are not able to do this.
Okay. And my last question for you is, does this impact your other platforms, such as Instagram and WhatsApp?
No, this is only about Singapore. Sorry,
Sorry.
I do apologize. Answering lots of questions. Strike that from the record. This is only about Facebook platform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
If I may
much.
now proceed to Mr. Tan, I have a couple of questions to take you through your paper. First, I'd like to talk about a couple of the recent measures that you've articulated in your written submissions that you say that Facebook has put in place or will put in place to enhance the integrity and quality of information that is shown to or pushed to Facebook users. I first start with changing news feeds so that you push people towards family and friends and much less towards news sites and viral stories. And my first question is, would you agree that there is still a risk of an echo chamber effect? That's the first. Would you agree that as a result of that, filter bubbles can continue to perpetuate? And thirdly, family and friends, do you agree that family and friends can continue to share viral articles, precisely the same articles that you tried to push them away by making this newsfeed algorithm adjustment?
Thank you, Minister, for your question. We launched Meaningful Social Interactions earlier this year in January, and the reason why was we wanted to ensure that people are having meaningful conversations on our platform. We wanted to make sure that, and we did a study last year and it's on our Hard Questions blog, which also determined and informed us that when people interact with their friends and family, their close networks, they have more meaningful interactions. Now that means that in newsfeed, that will be prioritized in your newsfeeds. You will see more content from your friends and your family, and that's how newsfeed will work. That means it deprioritizes some pages. To your second question with regards to whether it will engender or it will promote echo chambers, we have done studies, and actually the Reuters digital study of 2017 had also suggested that in fact on Facebook, users are exposed to a wider variety of content outside of their potential feeds. And so I think that's something that we want to study more in detail. Whether, and your third question as to where they can share, it depends on what individual users want to share. If your friends and family want to share something which is interesting to them, they're able to do so as well.
So in short, your response, if I may paraphrase you, is that
Sure.
Facebook as yet does not know whether the adjustment to the newsfeed algorithm will see a reduction in the dissemination of DOF, but you're in the process of testing it out.
We continue to test and reiterate newsfeed regularly.
Thank you. My next question is on your down ranking of certain kinds of news,
Yes.
which you had alluded to in your response earlier.
Yes.
It is also in your paper. First question is, can I confirm this is algorithm driven based on, I quote, signals that people on Facebook produce to deprioritize content that is inauthentic, unquote. Can I ask you this question? You are relying on people's response to those articles. When I say you, I mean the algorithm is depending on signals by other people as to whether they welcome or like or dislike this particular article in deciding whether, in your view, as a proxy, this is more likely to be legitimate news or DOF.
Thank you, Minister. That's how newsfeed works. At any one point of time, supposing you have 1,000 friends and each of them posts 3 posts a day, that's your inventory. And to help you consume that, we would rank all of these posts according to relevance. So every single post that you see on Facebook has a relevance score, and we and the algorithm relies on a variety of signals. A variety of signals that tell us which is more relevant to you, which is less relevant to you, and that will attribute to the news, the score on that particular post. Now, if people tell us that either through a variety of actions, it could be less likes, it could be less comments, it could be I don't want to see this post or hide this post, or I don't want to see this comments or post from a certain person or page, that gives us a clue as to the fact that you don't want to see that, and that will consequently, you will see that less in your feeds. And as Mr. Milner had also mentioned earlier, we apply those kinds of signals to sites also, which have malicious or shocking ads, with engagement bait, which are clickbait, and we downrank those significantly. So you see them less on your newsfeed.
So if I may just summarize, your submission is about what Facebook is trying to do to reduce the risk of DOF spreading. And if I hear you right, you are relying on proxies to help you assess not the truth or falsity of the article, which you do not have a policy of doing, but rather you are trying to tackle the question of whether this is likely to be true or false through proxies such as how your friends respond to it, how other people respond to it, whether it's a site that has clickbait or whether it's a trusted site. In a way, you're relying on proxies to help you determine whether this is more likely or less likely to be DOF. Is that correct?
Minister, we try a variety of ways, and I think in my submission, and paragraph 3 of page 3, we had also suggested, and we are testing tests in the US to prioritize news which are broadly trusted from publications from a diverse variety of sources. So we're constantly trying to test new products and policies that can help us combat false news.
Yeah. So am I right to say that if you rely on proxies, then there is a possibility that what you may deem through your algorithm as low-quality sites may in fact be sites that purvey truths, accurate information, scientific information, but they are low quality because they're clickbait and they're commercially driven. Whereas, through your algorithm, again as a proxy, DOF sites or DOF articles can still get through. So it's in a way accepting that it's not foolproof. I think we all can agree with that.
Nothing is foolproof, and we are constantly iterating our newsfeed.
Understand. I move on to the next change you've done, which is ad transparency. And you understand that, am I right to understand that your ad policy still relies on targeting based on the Facebook users that are more likely than not to want to see that kind of ad, except that the only change is that other people who search for that ad who would not have received it will be able to find it, instead of it being a dark advertisement.
Yeah, you can go on, when we roll this out later in the year, you can see any ads that a page is running on Facebook. So for example, if Disney is running an ad for Mickey Mouse, you can see that they potentially, and this is hypothetically of course, they can also run an ad for Star Wars, for example. So you are able to see, this ad transparency will allow us, anybody on Facebook, to look at a page and to see what ads are being put on the page.
Thank
Yes.
you have another approach, which is to show up related articles. Yeah, related articles. And that is, from your point of view, an improvement over flagging disputed content. Is it possible, again, and I think the answer is self-evident because it's not foolproof against DOF, that a related articles algorithm could end up in a situation where you reinforce DOF with other DOF. So you look at an article, and if you're looking at the related articles associated with it to ascertain whether it is disputed or not, but you could end up with other articles that in fact reinforce the falsehood, but in a variety of ways.
I think how the related articles tool works is in parts where we are testing the related article, we rely on third-party fact checkers. And the third-party fact checkers will also surface some related articles related to that particular article and present other views as well.
Okay. Can I ask you, your submission has been about Facebook. I'd asked earlier Mr. Milner about your other platforms, such as WhatsApp, which is a closed group, transmission of information amongst a closed group of people, as well as Instagram, which can be both open and closed, depending on how you set your settings. Has Facebook been looking at the DOF situation and the potential for DOF in WhatsApp as well as Instagram?
Thank you, Minister. We're really concerned when we hear, if there are bad examples of bad actors on all of our platforms. I think that's something that we take very seriously and very concerned about. We also understand that sometimes information, both good and bad, can appear on these platforms, and that's why we have community standards to take those down and to remove them from our platforms. With regards to platforms like WhatsApp and Instagram, we know that we already have been doing launching multiple initiatives It could be false news PSAs. We call that public service announcements, both on the platforms and off the platforms, across our platforms. But we also are experimenting with product solutions. And one of the things that we are testing is a forwarded message tag. For example, it helps people to distinguish between original messages on WhatsApp, for example, and forwarded messages on WhatsApp. So we haven't rolled it out yet, but we are experimenting, we're testing it, and to see whether by placing a forwarded message tag, people might be more discerning as to that the particular piece of message or content has been forwarded. In addition to that, we also realized that that spam protocols are very important. So as you know, for WhatsApp, for example, they're not based on content because we're end-to-end encrypted. But we look for signals. So for example, if there's a high volume of content from a single source, that also sends a signal to us that that may not be totally authentic. Our spam controls will catch that as well. And that applies, the same tools that we use to fight commercial spam can also be applied when bad actors try to use our systems.
Just to stop you there, that means that your algorithm can be both over-inclusive as well as under-inclusive for obvious reasons. You're looking at signals and you may catch the wrong thing. What may not be spam, you catch a spam, and what is spam or in fact DOF, you are not able to detect because you're using
It's agnostic.
an algorithm. Can I read to you a paragraph again from Claire Waddle, and this is in her submission to the Select Committee, and I'd like to invite both Mr. Tan as well as witnesses from Twitter, Google, and AIC to respond because it applies to all of you. And I quote, the lack of transparency around promoted content on social platforms and search companies makes it impossible to know which campaigns have been undertaken. Currently, the technology companies themselves are the only ones who can view the scale of the problem. Even Twitter, which is researched most often because of its open and accessible API, is hard to study because it claims that it cleans feeds algorithmically, sometimes something not visible via the API. Without any external access to this data, there is no way to independently audit the scale of the problem, to understand how and when users have interacted with disinformation, and to understand how disinformation moves across platforms. In addition, the lack of data means that when initiatives such as Facebook's third-party fact-check project or Google's fact-check tags are implemented, there is no independent method for assessing their impact. Reporting on targeted advertising and algorithmic quirks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube have demonstrated that the platforms need to be undertaking much more frequent and in-depth investigations on their own technology, or should allow independent auditing. Crucially, any proactive changes based on these investigations, such as changing how inauthentic accounts are being categorized or how certain types of content are being downranked, needs to be transparent. And she goes on, basically, to say legally, social media companies aren't obligated to share data in the public interest, and what they can share is always shaped by users' privacy settings, country-specific rules about selling personal information, and the particular deals companies like Facebook and Twitter make with third-party businesses. But they are now the primary platforms for political conversation. As such, they should act in ways that support democratic practices, especially around sensitive political moments like elections. With the data at their disposal and the platforms they maintain, social media companies could raise standards for civility by refusing to accept ad revenue for placing fake news. They could let others audit and understand the algorithms that determine who sees what on a platform, unquote. There are the 2 points I'd like you all to address. First is her concern that your data and your algorithms, as well as the safeguards you are putting in or have put in, are not transparent to people outside the company. And from the perspective of governments around the world, certainly also Singapore, regulators, as well as national security agencies, as well as consumer interest groups, are not able to verify whether these safeguards that you put in place will indeed achieve the effect that you say you're seeking to achieve. And second, the point about your companies, while being commercial companies, who of course do CSR as well, you are more than just, or the service you provide is more than just a commercial service, but has now been shown to affect social stability, have been used to affect social stability, and has been used to impact democratic practices around the world, and has been used to affect other countries, whether by state-owned actors or otherwise. Could I just maybe invite Mr. Tan to respond first, and then invite the others to respond briefly in the interest of time?
Minister, sorry, could you repeat the last question, please?
The first question is with regards to transparency of your algorithms and your processes and your safeguards to external parties who have a keen interest in that, such as governments, regulators, national security agencies, and consumer interest groups and other entities outside your company. Claire Waddell's view is that, as an expert, that you need to be more open about this, to open yourself to independent auditing.
I know that I've suggested you take it, but would you mind if I
Let me do
take
the
those
second
questions?
question first.
Yeah.
The second question is that the services and your platforms are no longer just commercial services that you provide, but rather have an impact on democratic practices, on the stability of society, and on national security.
We recognize that we have more to do to improve transparency around how our platform works, how advertising works on the platform, and therefore to help academic experts and governments and others to understand these issues. We agree. However, it's interesting that one of the suggestions that Ms. Wardle and others have suggested is give us more access to your data and we will do this. And what has clearly been verified by recent events, and we spent a long time talking about it, if we do try and enable academic researchers to have more access to data, look at some of the issues it creates. So there's a real conundrum there for us to work with Ms. Wardle and others to figure that out. But we agree broadly that there needs to be more transparency. On your second point, the phrase we've used is that we know our platforms amplify human intent. And so that is both incredibly positive in lots of ways for democracy. Often when it comes to elections, they are the most talked about issue on Facebook in that country that year. Whatever else is going on, it's the election that grips people's attention, and they want to talk about it on platforms like Facebook. And therefore, it can contribute massively to the public debate and to dialogue. We know that candidates around the world have really appreciated being able to engage directly with voters through platforms like ours. But unfortunately, it also amplifies bad human intent. So people who want to try and undermine the integrity of democracy and elections also have used our platforms. And what we need to do is try to find ways to accentuate the positive and to deal with that negative in partnership with colleagues here and with governments and other organizations and people like Ms. Wardle.
Thank you. Maybe could we have Twitter?
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for the question. We agree that the path to transparency is an ongoing one. We've made an enormous amount of progress in the last 2 years, and especially since the end of the US election. But having said that, I would also want to point out that there are some specific actions that are being taken that I think strongly indicate for our company and for Twitter that we take this question very, very seriously. A couple of weeks ago, our CEO, Jack Dorsey, announced that we were embarking on an unprecedented project and initiative to include the smartest, the brightest, the best experts, researchers and academics to come join us in these questions. We have one of the most open calls for partnership in the world, and we will be making our data available. We will be making commensurate financial support for those who won't be able to necessarily join that but have the smarts to be at those tables. And we believe that this is the kind of commitment we need to work on these projects together. We know that there are real and present problems and crises in these areas, and we take them very seriously, and we believe that we don't have all the answers ourselves and that we're a work in progress. The second point I would make on that first question is that we continue to embark on a range of not only partnerships, but quite technical ways in which we do show our transparency that perhaps one researcher or another may not necessarily be fully aware of. For example, when we're dealing with issues of child sexual exploitation or minors in content, which is an extremely serious problem for our platforms, we have a partnership with the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children and a special VPN closed line for sharing incredibly sensitive data that helps solve crimes every day and helps solve those issues. So there is a track record there. Additionally, we have unique partnerships like an external trust and safety council comprising experts from all over the world and from our markets who advise us on culturally specific, nationally specific and locally appropriate ways to address and to countenance these kinds of challenges. And those can span everything from questions around freedom of expression to violent extremism to how do you deal with the fake followers phenomenon. So there's a range of those there, and we could furnish the committee with additional information in technical detail to help outline those and give you a sense of what that framework looks like and what that architecture looks like.
Yeah, thank you.
Most of that information is publicly available, but putting it all together sometimes gives you the picture. On the question of social stability, to those points and to the points I just made, I would say that we take that enormously seriously, and that's why we've embarked on these projects together, and that's why we're working so hard to make these adjustments and adaptations in real time. And like the other companies here, we're making real-time investments very quickly at scale, understanding that these are real issues that we have to work on together.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a brief response from Google.
Sure.
On the 2 points. Do you accept that transparency is important for regulators, government agencies, and national security agencies, and third parties, not academics, but third parties who look at what you're putting in place, whether it's adequate? And second, that you recognize that Google is no longer just a commercial service, but has an impact beyond just being commercial.
Thank you for the question, Minister, and good evening. I think it's evening now. To your first question, I want to say that we are very much committed to transparency and an ongoing dialogue with partners such as Dr. Wardle. In fact, actually just 2 days ago, I love breaking news, we actually just recently announced that we are partnering with Dr. Wardle and First Draft out of the Shorenstein Center at Harvard to create a disinfo lab, which will work on creating computational tools and editorial oversight, particularly related to elections. There was a lot of discussion about elections, during this session, and so we very much are committed to working with those who will sometimes criticize us and push back on us in this work. We know our responsibility, and I think this goes to your second question, which is we understand our responsibility in the information ecosystem. I would venture to say that search works a little bit differently, quite differently actually, from social media. And if you would like, I'm happy to do a quick little description of sort of how that works because you asked about the algorithm. If the chair would allow, I'd be happy to do that. The way search works is that people come to us, they come to Google and they search for something. So they have to proactively make a query to us. And the way that our algorithm delivers results is mostly based on the query itself. So it is localized for language and geography because we understand that Nasi Lemak in Singapore may mean something different than Nasi Lemak in Malaysia, and which one is better is certainly a question we have. An open question, not here, of course, not in Singapore. But I think that to understand how search works, the key is understanding the query. So when someone types in a cluster of words, what Google is doing, what the algorithm is doing, is trying to match what that cluster of words is to a thing, an entity, which is what we call it. So Singapore, the city of Singapore, the country of the United States, right? So in order to do that, it collects all of the ways that people ask for that particular thing in multiple languages, in the various ways that slang and local culture. And what it does is it delivers the thing that seems most relevant to that cluster of questions. And so the bulk of what is returned is due to the cluster of words that you type in. Now, there is a small measure of personalization related to what you have searched before. And I think it's best to give a specific example. So if I type in Barcelona, I could mean the city of Barcelona. I could mean the football team. And so what Google will do in those cases where the cluster of words that I type in could relate to various entities means that based on what I've searched in the past, so if I am an avid football fan and I have searched for football teams and Barcelona and what's happening with the Spain football rankings, then it will return more results related to that particular team. So that's a bit of an explanation to help you understand what our algorithm is doing when we're relating to search. That said, I think that we do very much understand our role in the information ecosystem, particularly when people have a question. This is incredibly important during elections, in breaking news situations. Where do they go? They go to search what's going on. And so we understand our responsibility, particularly in those moments. And so, for that reason, that's why we partner so closely with news organizations, with government, with NGOs, to make sure that when people come to us, and they come to us trillions of times every year, that we are delivering information that is useful and that is from highly authoritative sources. And that's why we partner so closely with the news industry and government on those issues.
Thank you. Since we're on Google, I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Your paper refers to a fact-checking label that allows publishers to state that their content has been fact-checked by certain fact-checking organizations. You also have a publisher knowledge panel that allows users of your site to identify the publisher. Right? Couple of questions. How widespread is the fact-checking label used in your searches, say 10%, 20%, 30% of search results, number one? Number two, for those that are not fact-checked, there is still no way then to discern DOF from fact? Is that your...
So specifically to the fact-check tag, this is something that we announced and piloted in the United States in 2016. Last year, we expanded it to be a global product offering. And so what that means is that any news organization, if they so choose, they can decide to opt in and to mark up their articles and their fact checks so that Google can actually read those particular fact checks. The adoption from a supply side varies by country, and in terms of the searches, I don't think that I actually can't give you a specific number in terms of adoption, namely because searches vary moment to moment, day to day, geography by geography. In fact, of the more than trillion searches every year, 15% of searches every single day are new searches.
Yes, we saw that. Thank you. Your written submission, you also say the following, and I quote, "Google recently took steps to strengthen our understanding of low-quality content, enabling us to improve and refine our algorithms for this category of queries," unquote. So my first question is this a recognition that the algorithms have not been able at this point to discern low quality from high quality content, DOF from fact? Number two, how long will this process of study take in your understanding of what low quality content entails, so that more accurate algorithms can be put in place to pick up and block DOF? And three, is Google relying purely on algorithms to do all the heavy lifting to discern DOF from fact, or is there a need for more significant human intervention?
So let me start by talking about sort of how search works in terms of our priority. We want to make sure that when people come to us, we are pointing to highly authoritative content. And so the way that we train our algorithm to do this is actually with search ratings. So we employ human beings who help us to evaluate various sources of information so that we can, when someone searches for a particular thing, that what they are receiving is from an authoritative source. So this is an ongoing process that we have been doing and will continue to do, because we are always trying to hone our algorithm to ensure that we fulfill our mission, which is to make sure that we're connecting people to high quality authoritative information. In terms of the ongoing process of our thinking and our work relating to helping to develop the ecosystem of authoritative sources, this is why we work so closely with news organizations. My team in particular, which is NewsLab, is focused on directly working with journalists, particularly so that they can newsrooms can grapple with the technological moment that we're in. And so it's an ongoing process. We will continue to do it, absolutely. And in fact, we sort of reiterated and expanded our commitment to the news industry in particular in our announcement 2 days ago, which really showed our commitment to the news industry, both in terms of grant funding as well as increasing programmatic work that we're doing. My role, just as an evidence of the evolution of what we've been doing within NewsLab, is something that has grown in Asia Pacific and globally over time and will continue to do so.
Thank you for the background. So in short, your answer to my first question is yes. The answer to the second question is that it's still work in progress, and you haven't given me a timeline.
Sorry,
and
if you
third,
could...
and the third answer you're giving me is that a human intervention is needed. So these are the three answers.
Sorry, if I could... I should have taken notes when you asked the questions in numerical order.
The first question is that by saying that Google is recently taking steps to understand what low-quality content is, to improve and refine your algorithm, is that recognition that Google's existing algorithm is not able to effectively discern DOF from fact and needs improvement?
Our founders, from the beginning, said that we would consistently needed to improve the algorithm. And so that has not changed, that will not change, for sure.
Second is this steps to strengthen your understanding. How long will this study take?
It's ongoing. It will continue.
And third, it requires human intervention, and algorithms cannot do all the heavy lifting.
We rely on humans to help to train the algorithms.
Thank you. I move on to the Guardian article, which says that research shows that the largest source of traffic to fake news channels on YouTube, which is owned by Google, comes from YouTube's Up Next function. So you look at something, you search for a video, and depending on your algorithm, it will pull something else that the algorithm thinks you'd like to watch. And the algorithm YouTube is using tends to promote these false news channels. And the reason for this is largely the fact that the Next Up function is influenced by popularity, such as, for example, user interest. This is something that was confirmed by Ms. Juniper Downs at the House of Commons hearing on the Committee for Digital Culture, Media and Sports this year, I believe. Yeah? And I just want to follow on. YouTube's Up Next function is reinforces the interest or point of view users have expressed interest in by watching any one video. And by constantly recommending videos that reinforce that one specific interest point of view, YouTube simply reinforces what has gone before, and matters tend to spiral in one direction as opposed to providing a balanced view. And so YouTube said before the UK House of Commons committee hearing that you try to ensure that you provide information that users want to watch and will watch. If someone is not expressing an interest in a particular type of content, it is hard for YouTube to insert something opposite to their interest and to expect them to watch it. If they do that, YouTube sees an abandonment of that service. So that is what was set out in the hearing, and explains YouTube's approach to the Up Next function. So first question is this: do you agree, I presume you agree, that the Up Next function continues to pose DOF risks and reinforcing DOF, that people watch and then you send something else along the same lines that's consistent. Number two, this needs to be addressed. And number three, it is not easy for YouTube and Google to address this because, as I've just articulated in the last paragraph, it acts against your commercial interest to do so.
So particularly related to YouTube, I would start by saying that, and actually this, I won't go into it in a lot of detail because obviously you watched the proceedings, but to reiterate what Juniper Downs said, YouTube, the up next function is very, very good at providing what most users who come to YouTube want, which is videos, lifestyle, music, that sort of thing. So most of the people who come to YouTube are coming for those types of resources. And the up next function is very good at that. Now, that said, 2% of watch time on YouTube is related to news. We know news is very different. The articles that you've seen and the feedback that we've gotten and the things that we've seen indicate that the up next function is not well tuned for news and that sort of content. We know, we acknowledge fully the mistakes that have been made in the past, absolutely. We are committed to making improvements and to hone the technology. And one thing I would say about that is this is where we are actually taking the learnings and the lessons from search and how we tune that algorithm and moving it and adopting it and leveraging that technology to YouTube. And one announcement that we just made, we made a lot of announcements this week, was that we actually announced that we are improving our algorithms so that in breaking news situations that we will prioritize authoritative sources over freshness and relevance in these types of searches, so that when people come to YouTube, when they come to search for this kind of content in breaking news situations, when the need is most acute, that we are making sure that we prioritize authoritative sources. And the work that NewsLab does and other parts of Google continue to do in terms of fostering partnerships with government, with news organizations, will only further enhance the ecosystem so that we have many more high-quality sources to go to.
The last question I had, which you've not addressed, is that is this a commitment by Google and YouTube to potentially act in a way that may be against your commercial interests and that you will do it voluntarily? Because as was reported by Ms. Juniper Downs in the House of Commons, if YouTube were to try to tweak the up next function and insert something that the user does not necessarily want to see, but it's necessary in order to correct a DOF that it may have viewed earlier, that you will simply just lose the user from your service, possibly to a competitor.
Now, I can't comment specifically on your paraphrasing of her testimony, but what I can say is that our commercial interest is making sure that our users trust the information that they get from us.
Maybe you just put
Bottom
up
line.
the
Sure.
comment again so that we're very clear that I paraphrased it correctly. If someone is not expressing an interest in a particular type of content, it is hard for YouTube to insert something opposite to their interest and to expect them to watch it. If they do that, YouTube sees an abandonment of their service.
So I think that the way that I respond to that is by our actions and our more recent announcements, which is that we are prioritizing high-quality, authoritative sources.
Thank
Full
you.
stop.
Thank you. Can I go to para 2A of your written submissions? And I quote, you pull it up. While we aim to ensure the quality of the information users find on Google Search and Google News, we are not positioned to evaluate disputes related to facts or characterizations laid out in a news article. For both Google Search and Google News, claims that a particular article's content is inaccurate will generally not result in its removal unless pursuant to a valid legal request, unquote. Can I hear from Google, in a way that was asked earlier of Facebook, that you do not have a policy to discern what are clear falsehoods from what is clearly truthful, and you do not have a policy to take down, or you do not have a policy to ascertain truth, and you do not have a policy to remove content that is clearly shown to be untrue?
Well, in this case, we do not host For search, we do not host the content, we just point to it. And our mission and our goal is to point to high-quality sources of information. If you were talking about a particular news article that, in your view, in someone's view, requires a correction, we would not even be able to correct it because it is another organization, another company's content. So in that case, I mean, if a news organization needs to make a correction, then they need to be the ones to do it. What we do is we, again, focus on making sure that what we point to is high quality.
So can I clarify? So your paragraph 2A, what you're saying is that Google is not in a position to discern what is DOF and what is true, but that if directed through legal authority, whether by statute or by court, you will do so, i.e. you would let another party, a legal authority, make that determination for you and you will comply with that order.
So, excuse me, when it comes to determining high quality authoritative sources, we do in fact rely on our partnerships with journalists, news organizations, governments, and NGOs because we understand that there is a lot of local nuance, cultural differences that need to be taken into account when dealing with content in general. So that is one aspect of what we do. In terms of what you asked related to the legality and responding to valid legal requests, we stand by our submission.
So if I may paraphrase you correctly, you take the position in para 2C because number one, you're not in a position to determine facts from falsehoods, and number two, you believe that you're not in a position to make that kind of cultural determination, and that you would just comply with an order validly imposed on you if something is DOF, deliberate online falsehood.
Let me be clear, we stand by our submission.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I just wanted to understand why you take the position that you are not positioned to evaluate disputes related to facts or characterizations laid out in a news article. Characterizations I can understand. I read their nuances, but facts, it's clearly factual.
Again, our goal in terms of focusing on highly authoritative sources is making sure that those authoritative sources do understand the local context. That's why we partner so much locally.
I understand. I move on to an example that my colleague raised, Mr. Shanmugam, initially put to Mr. Simon Milner, but I think we'll send it your way instead.
Okay.
And that is in relation to para 2, sorry, this is para 2A. Earlier I mentioned 2C, is actually 2A.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the example he raised. 8 years ago, there were two Christian pastors who made denigrating remarks about Singapore religions, Taoism and Buddhism, and they put it on their website, the videos, and it was then carried onto YouTube. All right? These would have been against multiculturalism and multiracialism in Singapore. It would have, it had caused a tremendous amount of unhappiness. Would YouTube, if asked, voluntarily remove those videos, or do you have to wait until the law directs you to do so?
I'm not a lawyer, and this is not my area of expertise. I came here to speak to the details of the submission in terms of what we have submitted specifically. I know for a fact that we will very much enjoy and want to provide our feedback with any proposed legislation that you decide to come out with. We will definitely, I know we are in open communication and we would be happy to provide feedback. Yeah. That's what I can say at this point.
But in our understanding whether legislation is required or whether we can rely on social media companies to act in a way that is both legally and culturally appropriate to the jurisdictions in which we operate is useful for us to understand. And in a clear example, where individuals in this country have put up videos that are inflammatory, that go against the fundamental grains of our society, that potentially tear at social fabric, pitting one religion against the other and adherence to one faith against another. using very derogatory language, and they put it on the internet, and it's carried on your platforms. Would you remove them voluntarily if asked through some policy that you have, or would you have to rely on legal requirements and legal coercion before you would do so?
So I think that, to use your specific example, I think that it is best if, of course, in these situations, especially if somebody is already contravening a law, that the person, that as what happened in this particular situation, there was a request made to the source of the content, and they voluntarily decided to take it down. In reference to whether or not Google or YouTube would take down a video, I can say that we will review all valid legal requests.
So you need a valid legal request, but you have no policy to remove voluntarily based on the cultural specifics or the sensitivities of specific jurisdictions in which you operate.
As I'm a program person and not someone in policy or legal, I would have to take your question back to my colleagues, and we'd be very happy to reply to that.
Yes, we would appreciate a written response to that.
Sure.
Can I move on to a hearing in the UK House of Commons in which Google and YouTube were asked for the amount of expenditure that you place on security. And your representative said that you spend tens of millions of dollars on security. And when asked about how much YouTube made in total, annual revenue, Ms. Juniper Downs was not aware. But subsequently, a figure was surfaced by the House of Commons, which is $10 billion, making this a 0.1% expenditure of annual revenue on security. So that's the first factual point. It's been some time since the hearing, and I presume Google and YouTube would have had the opportunity to review the figures posed by the House of Commons, because there was no challenge by Juniper Downs at the hearing. Second is third-party estimates that we have of Google's revenue for 2017. 2017 annual revenue is US $110 billion, right? This is third-party estimates. And on the 21st of March this year, in fact, this is just yesterday, Google announced that you intended to spend $300 million over the next 3 years, which is $100 million a year, to improve the accuracy and quality of news appearing on its platforms. So the response that Ms. Juniper Downs gave was in relation to security on YouTube, and the House of Commons landed at a figure of 0.1% of annual revenue. And here, based on third-party estimates and Google's announcement of $100 million expenditure a year, for Google, that would be 0.27% of 2017 revenues for 3 years, or less than 0.1% of annual revenue. Are you able to shed some light as to whether these figures are accurate? Because they do suggest that the expenditure on security, on dealing with DOF, on dealing with hate crime and other problematic content, low-quality content, incendiary content, seems rather low based on what was disclosed to the UK Parliament, and certainly based on figures that are out in the public arena.
So the figures that, the figure that Juniper Downs gave in terms of how much was being spent, tens of millions of dollars on security, and the $300 million over 3 years, those two figures I can confirm. The ones that are from third-party estimates as well, or whichever one the UK committee came up with, I can't comment on because I don't know the provenance of those, of their methodology or sources.
Will you be able to put in a written reply on that?
I can take it back, and we will get back to you on that.
Thank you.
But I do want to make one point about sort of dollar figures, which is that, as I mentioned, the learnings and the technology and that we develop for search, which you can imagine how much we spend to develop and continue to hone the amount, the security and the authoritativeness of our algorithms in search. Those learnings are also then used in YouTube and other places. So to look at just one dollar figure and one budget line item, I don't think really reflects what we are doing in terms of the overall effect and the leveraging that we learn from each other's from the technologies from different products. That said, in addition, because I am more familiar with GNI and what we're doing with the news industry, that announcement about the $300 billion over 3 years was one point of a number of different initiatives and partnerships that we are doing with news organizations around the world. So, in journalism, we always like to say we like the big number, but there is a lot that we are doing, and I think that could really help to foster the ecosystem that we're trying to create, which in the end, from where we stand, will be the best service to fighting misinformation.
Now, I appreciate your point that it's not just a headline dollar figure that will necessarily determine the quality of your measures. These are technological solutions, and it's not just how much you invest, how much money you throw at it, but whether your systems actually work to effectively tackle DOF, however you choose to do it. But your submissions, and indeed by Twitter and by Facebook, you have outlined the enormity of the challenge. You have highlighted the hundreds of hours of video and the trillions of searches that are done. And then you say you have a firm commitment to tackle DOF through your corporate responsibility. So in a way, we have to examine various sources in order to triangulate whether what you're saying is going to bear fruit, as my colleague Mr. Shanmugam had said. So given the enormity of the challenge and the many things that you say you need to do in order to improve the way in which your company deals with DOF, certainly, I hope you don't mind, we have to look at things like how much you actually spend and what you spend on, and then certainly we also look at the efficacy of your measures and Ms. Waddle's point about transparency to regulatory agencies to assure ourselves that you are taking those measures to protect the national security and well-being of the jurisdictions in which you operate.
Yes, absolutely. And Minister, if I may just make one comment about this. We absolutely know that this is an important issue. We know our role as a technology company and as a place that people go to for answers, our incredible responsibility in this ecosystem. I would say that one area that we haven't had the opportunity to discuss in this forum yet, and I hope we will, and I hope it will be of interest to you since you are the education minister.
Oh, I'm not.
Is, oh, you're
That's
not?
fake news.
No, it's not. Oh my gosh, my apologies. I thought that, I apologize. That education is really a big part of the work that we're doing as well, so that users will actually know and be aware that they need to go to us and go to other sources to find information. And I think that that's one area that we have invested heavily in as well as an organization, and we will continue to do so in partnership with the government as well as news organizations and others.
No, Ms. Liu, we appreciate your submission on the amount of effort you're putting in for media literacy. The same goes for the other companies that are here to give testimony today. Given the large numbers of people around the world, and certainly in Singapore, that use your platforms, how far your outreach goes, how many people are covered, and whether the media literacy efforts bear fruit. I think it's just one contributing factor. And I think neither you nor we are saying that media literacy on its own will tackle the challenge of DOF, but it's
certainly not.
an essential part of the equation.
Absolutely.
Can I next move to Twitter, if I may? Ms. Reen, your company's API, Application Programming Interface, is provided to developers who want to design Twitter-compatible applications and innovate using Twitter data. But while it has many creative benefits and uses, it also is a source of a large quantum of automated spam. For example, this handle, Patriotic Pepe, an account automatically replied to all tweets from handle the real Donald Trump with spam content in the lead up to the 2016 US presidential elections. I think this is widely reported. You might be familiar with this. Can I ask you, on behalf of your company, whether you have managed to find a solution that will effectively deal with the issue of bots and malicious bots using your API? That's the first question. And second, given that you open your API to developers, and that's got to do with the earlier concern that we raised with Facebook about Cambridge Analytica, whether in respect of Twitter, have applications using your API been established that have abused private information from your users, certainly without their consent and knowledge? Second question.
Thank you, Minister. I'll take the second question first, if that's all right.
Yes.
Twitter is a little bit different to a lot of other platforms in that it has a radically open architecture. So almost all the information about an account is already public. A user who opens an account decides and puts the information there themselves. It's a personal decision, and it has to be a considered decision. And we make sure that our users can decide for themselves. So the amount of demographic information that they might share or what they put there is already publicly available, and they can decide how much they put there. So therefore, when it comes to our API, in addition to tightening our rules and our terms of service around this, and in addition to the progress that we've been making in taking down that malicious behaviour, particularly in the last 6 months, I would also add that because the platform is public, the range of personal information that might be available is simply not in the vicinity and not relational to this question. We could provide and furnish the committee with a bit more technical detail on this so that you could examine it in more detail. Yes. And full disclosure, I'm not an expert, particularly in this area, but we do know this, and we know that this is a fundamental tenet of the platform that helps inure and protect it against this kind of behaviour.
Thank you. Can I move on to your submission, where you outline a Twitter information quality initiative, and that involves, amongst other things, those strategies, as well as, in particular, machine learning to spot malicious automation and to automatically shut those handles down. My question is, again, you're relying on machine learning. Would you agree with me that there's a risk of either being over-inclusive or under-inclusive in tackling malicious bots? That means it's machine learned. There's very little human intervention, and you could shut down legitimate handles. By the same token, your machine learning program may allow malicious bots to continue to operate, or handles that are used to disseminate DOF.
So we've been continuing and deepening our investments in machine learning and AI to address malicious and manipulative behaviour on the platform. And I would say it's partially dependent on, it's a process and it takes time. But I would submit that we're very proud of the progress that we've been making so far. And we have gotten to the point where we're challenging 6.4 million accounts a week on the platform, and the amount of AI and machine learning that's being applied to that means that we're able to interfere with more of those accounts more quickly. 523,000 accounts a week, and more than 1.1 just in the area, 1.1 million in the area of terrorism and extremism alone taken down. I would say that our position on this is that it's not under-inclusive or over-inclusive, but that we're getting smarter at it every day, and that we're being more and more effective at taking those accounts down. And we're seeing that in the quality of information that's available on the platform, and that's an important tell for us. And we recognise we need to expand the range of research and discovery here. But I would say that given the expansion of our efforts and the progress that we've made since we started the Information Quality Project in early 2017, that we can see a measurable impact. I would say at this point we're not as worried about the binary that you've just presented, and we're much more interested in the technical detail of how we continue to grow our capabilities to know and understand. And to that point, I would say that one of the biggest and most important and overall discoveries is that an enormous amount of malicious, manipulative, automated type behaviour on the platform can be discovered and understood by certain kinds of behaviour. And we understand that a lot of this really pollutive information and malicious information is in fact automated. And we're finding that when we address it that way, that's a really important way to do it. So I think that we're in an optimistic pose on this right now.
Would it be correct, however, to say that it will always be a game of catch-up, that the purveyors of DOF will learn how to game your algorithm that uses machine learning, and then you'll then have to catch up, and that will be an endless process?
I don't think we necessarily see it as a dichotomy like that. I think we've got instances where we're actually getting much better at this. There are situations where, for certain kinds of accounts, we can say that 75% of certain kinds of malicious and automated accounts are taken down even before they tweet. And this is a relatively new development for us. So I would say that, yes, the challenges persist, and the bad actors will always be motivated, and we are alive and alert to that threat, and we need to continue to invest. But I would also say that we're making some progress here. There's a lot to do, but we've put additional people, additional resources, and we're inviting external actors to join us in this effort to understand it better. But I think that we're making some positive progress.
Your acting general counsel for Twitter, Mr. Sean Edgett, testified by way of a written answer to questions for the record to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence hearing on social media influence in 2016 US elections on the 15th of January this year. And he outlined Twitter's policy, which is that so long as users do not violate the Twitter rules or Twitter terms of service, Twitter does not place restrictions on organic content that users choose to tweet about and share with their followers, including content that contains commentary about elections in other countries. To be in compliance with Twitter's protocol, users need to be in compliance with local laws regarding online conduct and acceptable content. And I quote now from oral evidence given by Mr. Nick Pickles, Head of Public Policy and Philanthropy in the UK for Twitter, to the House of Commons Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee on the 8th of February. And I quote him at question 510, 517, and 553. I think they may pull it up shortly, but I'll just read it very briefly to you. Yeah? I quote, "We are not going to remove content based on the fact that it is untrue," unquote. We do not have rules based on truth. So basically, can I confirm that, number one, Twitter does not have a policy to discern, even if asked, between what is true and what is DOF? And number two, it will not, or Twitter does not have a policy of taking down information that is known and proven to be false, unless there is a legal requirement to do so.
Sean Edgett's testimony and Nick Pickles' testimony holds true and stands. If the committee would allow, I would like to add a little bit of contextual information that might help, especially for Singapore. A number of the examples given this afternoon and tonight have referred to the specifics and the importance of Singaporean law. And there's a particular discussion and concern, for example, around the importance of the social fabric and respect for the way in which the uniqueness of Singapore makes it one of the most religiously, ethnically and racially diverse countries in the world. I believe it got, again last year, the #1 ranking in the world for one of the most harmonious, but also one of the most diverse. In November 2016, we rolled out a hateful conduct policy. We had considered, against our terms of service and our rules, that we had adequately addressed a lot of these issues. In 2016, looking at the evolving behaviour on the internet and some of the issues happening in global conversations and local conversations, we saw a need to make additions and changes. And one of the most significant areas is around hateful conduct and threats and harassment based on personal or local characteristics that may include ethnicity, religious, race, gender identity. In addition, as the conversations have continued to evolve and as things have become a lot more complex around the world, we decided to further update that policy. And on the 18th of December in 2017, after almost a year of additional learning and application, we decided to add further detail to that fact, and we updated and created our violent and extremist group policy. We now have detailed much more our commitment to making sure that incitement, encouragement, harassment, the inference of that kind of racism is not allowed on our platform. We have zero tolerance for it. We don't want to see it there. So, to the specifics of Singapore, I would say there are many, many instances where we have policies that apply to these circumstances that can answer this question. So we see the question of by law order, by court order or not court order as a false binary in this instance, because we take it not only against our constantly updating policies, but in recognition of what's happening around the world and our commitment to iterate as we go. This is only one example, and we could provide additional ones, but I think perhaps not fully in the detail of our submission is this technical area where we could detail more how that's possible to address the worst and the most dangerous of how, if we understand correctly your definition of DOFs, how and what is most prescient and most concerning to the committee.
Thank you very much for the offer to supplement. There is a concern about the responsiveness of Twitter to tackle pressing situations. And Minister Shanmugam gave an example earlier of the Tennessee Republican Party Twitter handle, which was impersonated, and the authentic user needed 11 months before Twitter would take down the false handle. You would have heard what he said earlier about the reach of the false handle, far outstripping that of the original authentic user. There is another example of an issue with responsiveness, and that is in relation to Election Day on 7th of November 2017 in the US, where a Twitter account known as MAGA Mike King tweeted more than a dozen times on Election Day, 7th of November 2017, with a graphic that purportedly instructed 2016, purportedly instructed Virginians how to vote by phone text. And the graphic included logos of the Democratic Party and its gubernatorial candidate, Rolf Northam. The count remained active for almost 3 hours out of the 13 hours where the polls were open in the US state of Virginia. Twitter's automated spam detection system in 2016 identified malicious behavior originating from this particular account and took action to hide the user's tweets from appearing in searches and counting towards hitchens. This was even before a manual review of the account's activity, but it took 3 hours out of a 13-hour period at a time where that 3 hours is a precious 3 hours for democracy in the state. Could you respond to these two examples that were circulated on the media about what appears to be a distinction between Twitter's commitment on paper and what it actually does, even in the US?
I would say that we're congruent because you're talking dog years at Twitter at the moment, given the progress and the amount of work going on. Where you're definitely describing very difficult situations that happened 15 months ago. Since that time, in fact, over the last period, we've made more than 30 changes to our product and our policies, and our ability to respond to these kinds of circumstances and our recognition towards the special nature of elections and why they need special care. And our commitment to that has completely changed. Like other companies, we've committed to an industry-setting ads transparency centre. We have committed to enhancing, in fact, we have paused our public verification process in order to further develop it, deepen it, and contextualise it so that it comes out as a service that enables us to understand more facts, and for people who are authentically on our platform, able to present those facts about themselves. But the verification of politicians, their ability to safely operate and effectively operate on our platform and to post freely and safely is of an enormous value to us. And I would say that if we were to compare a November to November or a November to now, there wouldn't be the same recognition. And like all of the companies here, we're undertaking special measures in preparation for the midterm elections. There's an enormous amount of resourcing going into that, and I think there are a lot of lessons learned. So I would say that we could progressively measure and say that we not only are congruent, but that moment has passed in 2016.
Okay. As said earlier during the questions of Facebook, the future will see whether the performance matches the commitment by the companies. And we see this as a partnership because whether we take further regulatory action will also depend on the firm's commitments on paper, by word, but certainly by deed as well.
I think this, if the Minister would commit, I think this also reflects on a larger fact, which is the live and fast-moving nature of these issues, of the technology, and of the social structures and social scaffolding in which we're operating here. Yes. And that's why we're not only asking for partnership, but for Twitter, we deeply value the fact that we're an open platform, that we treasure freedom of expression and a wide array of voices on the platform, and that quality means a lot to us. And we think that moving too quickly without all the information or just a small subset of information at a time when the discovery and work together is really essential is something that should be considered. We see this as an enormous and ongoing effort that requires a lot of shared resources.
Thank you very much. If I might just turn to Mr. Jeff Payne from Asia Internet Coalition before I yield to my colleagues, if you ask my colleagues' patience. Can I just ask you a couple of questions in regards to your representations to this committee? First, I had a good look at your submission, and what jumps out is that the Asia Internet Coalition, of which all other companies are members here, and many others not in this room, believes a collaborative approach is necessary to solve the problems of DOFs, not just governments or social media companies, but also communities, educators, and others across the community. And your concerns about legislation are, if I may distill them correctly, as follows. Number one, that discerning whether information is true or false is highly subjective, nuanced, and difficult. Number two, you're concerned about a real risk of compromising freedom of speech, i.e. the net may be cast overly wide to stifle speech that is true and factual. Three, your view that existing laws in Singapore are adequate and clear, and that no specific legislation is needed on top of current legislation to address the harms posed by DOF, and these harms articulated by Minister Shamgung earlier, national security risks and social risks being amongst them. Number four, you're concerned that new legislation on DOF may be overly prescriptive and fetter innovative solutions by companies and other players. And fifth, that social media companies do not want to be required to act as judges of information accuracy, not to be put in a position where you're asked to adjudicate on facts. So can I ask a couple of questions with respect to that? Is this an accurate summary of your position?
Thank you very much to the committee and for your questions. Yes, that is the way we feel. Basically, the AIC represents 10 different member companies, and when we looked at the submission, we looked at very much promoting a multi-stakeholder model simply because, as you heard from many of my colleagues, it's a very evolving and fast-moving space. So I think it's great that you're having this kind of select committee. I think it's great that you had the written submissions and the testimony here today, because the word partnership has come up here a number of times today and this evening, and I think that's very encouraging. In our submission, we shared a couple of different things and two international examples. The one around the high-level expert group with the European Union. At the time of writing, we only submitted that this was ongoing, but as with many of the hot off the press or the new programs, the report that was prepared by the high-level expert group was released last week. And many of the things that that high-level expert group recommended are aligned with the things that we recommended in the AIC submission. I see a lot of very encouraging things. So when we did our submission, we did include company-specific initiatives that are ongoing, whether it be through Twitter or Google or Facebook or other members. But I think in a general sense, I see a lot of encouraging things happening because it is a fast evolving space, continuously updating and changing policy guidelines as they need to be changed to meet current demands. I think it's important for us to look at some of the other initiatives in a general sense, so not a company-specific sense, but in a general sense. New stringent advertising guidelines that promote transparency, product improvements. I have seen this happen a lot in the last few months, so it's, again, a very new thing. Fact-checking partnerships, media and information literacy education partnerships. I think that's one of the crucial things that we look at is digital literacy and how to build it, not only for academics and journalists and industry and government, but also for the citizens of your country. As I mentioned, the high-level expert group report came out last week. Claire Wardell is part of that group. I would actually say it's probably a little bit early to have experts in this space because the focus really heated up on DOFs after the U.S. election, I mean, in my opinion.
Yes.
And I think that what I've seen from our member groups is a commitment, whether it be through hiring additional 10,000 people or hiring or deploying new programs and establishing new partnerships. That's all encouraging. I think this engagement with the Singapore government's encouraging as well. There's not a lot of places in the world that you can look to as a best practices solution that you can just plug and play. Every country is different. Everyone has their own unique needs. So, just again, hot off the presses, that high-level expert group report came out last week. Yes. And I was happy to see a lot of first of all, there was no call for legislation, so that supports what we feel. But it also highlighted a lot of the very similar things that we were calling out in our submission.
Thank you. I'll come to the EC report and HLEG report shortly, and bring you through some of the paragraphs there so that we are clear as to what the report actually said and didn't say. Sure. And whether your submission is indeed an accurate representation of that. But first, to confirm that my earlier summary of the reasons for AIC's concerns about legislation are accurate, yes?
Yes.
Am I correct? Yeah, thank you. And in suggesting a collaborative approach, am I right to say there's an implicit recognition that a company's measures alone will not be sufficient in dealing with DOFs, and that you need a whole of society a solution to tackle DOFs, and it's a long-term solution?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. You also say in your report that you recognize, or AIC recognizes that in, I quote, egregious cases, courts and other relevant authorities should decide if rules have been broken, unquote. Am I right to say that AIC therefore accepts that in very clear cases, from your point of view, and egregious cases, legislation and legal action would be appropriate to tackle the risk posed by DOF?
And do you mean that we'd be served a court order, or member companies would be receiving a court order?
Such as that. receiving a court order or regulatory action being taken in respect of the perpetration of DOF?
I think many of the members have policies around content takedown procedures when court orders are presented.
Yeah. Can I now move on to your segment of your report where you point to the adequacy of Singapore laws and recommend that no specific legislation on DOF is therefore needed, and that existing Singapore law will suffice in tackling DOF, including, as you say earlier, egregious cases that need regulatory action to deal with. If I may take you through, I've got the legislation, and this is in relation to a written submission and a verbal testimony by a professor from Singapore University Law Faculty, the Dean, Professor Goh Yi Han, and he testified last week that precisely the opposite of what AIC is saying on this point, that in his view, Singapore legislation is inadequate to tackle the nature of DOF and the risks that DOF poses to Singapore, in fact to other societies as well, and that he sees the need of legislation that is in a way, in his proposal, similar to the concept of a civil injunction, to tackle the risk posed by proliferation. You tackle it, but without interfering with the right of the purveyor of that information to say his piece and to be able to prove that he has a right to say his piece.
Yeah.
May I just bring you through the legislation first? In your written representations, you cited a variety of legislation in Singapore. Let me start off with the list. I presume you're referring to the Telecommunications Act. There's a provision under Section 45 that deals with the knowing transmission of false messages through telecommunications. The Penal Code, Section 298A, on wounding racial or religious feelings or promoting ill will amongst different racial or religious groups. Number 3 would be the Administration of Justice Protection Act, Section 3.1, which defines what scandalizing the court is or interfering with the administration of justice. That's got to do with legislated or codified laws on contempt. 4, the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, where Section 8.1a, 8.1b, c, and d refer to offences relating to causing feelings of enmity, ill will, and so on between different religious groups. Would you agree with the testimony of Professor Goh Yi Han, and if you like, we can furnish you with a transcript of what he said and his written submissions, that there are indeed gaps in existing law, and that is contrary to AIC's recommendations?
So I wasn't here for the testimony, but I would say a couple of things. One, that's the kind of person that should be part of the collaborative process, so it's great that you're involving people with differing views. I didn't include any of the specific laws. We had a focus group on the initiatives that we're talking about here today, and there were 9 or 10 different laws. So I didn't list all of them because, one, I'm not a lawyer, and 2, I didn't want to call on any specific law. I do think, though, that the DOFs are a fairly new thing, and I don't think that we should rush to legislation. And that's not only for this instance with the internet type of consideration. I think if you look at all kinds of things, there's taxation on cross-border digital trade, for example. Many nations around the world are looking at that, but nobody has really kind of solved that puzzle yet. So in that vein, that's what we were talking about. It's like, no use in rushing to a legislative approach when we can look at, again, a multi-stakeholder approach that includes differing opinions, because we do want to hear that. And it would be great to hear those gaps. And I think that that's what we bring as the industry association, but also on behalf of our member companies who want to have a solution, because I don't think anyone has the answer finished yet. And I think with respect to earlier comments about, are you playing catch up? Well, it's probably going to be a continuous and ongoing process rather than saying, great, we've checked that box, we can move on now.
And just refer to what you just said earlier, which is that you didn't list specific laws, but your concern was about rushing to legislate, and precisely what we're not doing, and that's why we're having a series of hearings
Yes.
to hear from a broad cross-section of the community and industry. But I just want to catch on your point that you didn't look at specific legislation. Is it right to say that in making that particular recommendation that the AIC's view is that Singapore's laws are adequate, that this view was not derived from a thorough analysis of both the law and the procedures, and it's a general statement of belief?
I think when we discussed the things that were part of the laws that are currently on the book, a lot of them were actually aligned with the community guidelines and policies of the various companies in the AIC. So we didn't really see that as being a major issue with respect to any kind of legislation on DOFs.
So Mr. Payne, you have here oral testimony and a written record by a law professor, a dean of the law faculty in Singapore, who has done a thorough analysis of our legislation and the legal procedures, including criminal and civil procedures that are relevant to the provisions that I've just articulated. And these are actually taken from his report and his oral testimony. We'll be happy to furnish you a copy.
Sure.
So that's one. I want to see if AIC's view has changed or will change in light of law professor's thorough assessment. And second, if I may just give you an example as to why he thinks existing legislation is inadequate. And that's got to do with the fact that the aforementioned provisions that I've articulated, the Penal Code, the Telecommunications Act, these are penal legislation. The act has to have happened. The harm must have been caused. An investigation within Singapore must be carried out. A perpetrator must be found, investigated, given due rights, and then prosecuted before a court of law, found guilty, convicted, and an appeal process heard. That could take months before a final adjudication is reached as to whether he had or she had breached the law, if it's a bot, whether the bot had done it. And the perpetrator may not be identified, may not be identifiable, may be identified but may not be within the 720 square kilometers that Singapore, that's all there is. And therefore, the criminal processes in the legislation that I've articulated will not tackle the harm caused by the speed through which DOFs spread. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm not going to challenge the dean of the law school. Again, I'm not a lawyer.
Thank you.
But I do think that, excuse me, that there's room for a learning process, and I think that having the consultative process like we're having today is where we'll pick that up.
So knowing that there are national security concerns, that was right up front in today's presentation, that governments are legitimately concerned about, and that society be concerned about racial and religious tensions, not just in Singapore, but in many countries around the world, including small countries and big, that governments have a legitimate interest to have in place processes, whatever they may be, that can result in expeditious tackling of DOF that can incite national security concerns or racial or religious concerns in the country. Would you agree?
I don't doubt that there are legitimate, valid concerns that were pointed out earlier and that we have been given to us here today. And I think they're real concerns. And I think that's why so many governments around the world are actually looking at this very recently, including now. So yes, the concerns are legitimate. And yes, it requires further study and collaboration with not only government and industry, but also media, also academics and citizens.
Mr. Payne and Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Shanmugam would like to follow up on the point so that the flow is continuous. May yield the floor to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Payne, I just want to be very clear, right? You know, I ask very simple questions and I want simple answers. Can you pick up your written statement? The last sentence of the first paragraph, second page. Furthermore, the boundaries of free speech and expression in the Singapore context are already well defined by existing Singapore laws, which are widely thought to be comprehensive enough to address the issue. The point you're making is that we have enough laws, we don't need a brand new law to deal with this, right? That's the point being made there?
At this time, yes.
Right. Can you just accept that that's inaccurate? Then we can move on.
What is inaccurate?
Your statement. Because you have just been told that, and if you want, we can go through the legislation to show the gaps. But if you're prepared to accept it at face value, that there are gaps in terms of dealing with DOFs, then can we say that that sentence you put there, and you're not a lawyer, has to be qualified, and you accept that there are gaps which are not covered by current legislation?
There could be gaps.
Thank you. Carry on. I'll come back to you later.
Mr. Payne, can I just take up your point, your concern about it being very hard to discern truth from falsehood, and social media companies not wanting to be mandated to adjudicate between what is true and what is false. And I want to give a couple of examples that I pulled up after searching Google for examples that can help illustrate the point. And the point is this, whether you agree that even in some fairly clear-cut cases, and these are widely publicized in the Western media, some social media companies, including colleagues seated before us, the companies they represent, have been rather slow to act. So not just about uncertainty at the fringes of truth and falsehood, but even in very clear inflammatory situations, these companies have not been responsive. And so I just give you a couple of examples, if I may. The first is involving Google and YouTube. There is a speaker in the video, David Duke, Minister Shanmugam articulated earlier, putting up a video entitled "Jews Admit Organizing White Genocide," unquote. And this video contains quotes and data from his book, Jewish Supremacism. It talks about Zionists ethnically cleansing the Palestinians and also wanting to ethnically cleanse Europeans and Americans. But when asked to testify before the UK Home Affairs Parliamentary Committee, YouTube refused to block the video, entitled as aforementioned, on the grounds that it did not cross the line into hate speech, even though it admitted that the video was anti-Semitic. And YouTube explained that there was no clear definition of hate speech under British law, and that YouTube has its own guidelines, and that the general expression against a country, for example, will not qualify as hate speech, but that promoting or advocating violence against a particular group based on race or ethnicity would constitute hate speech. So in a way, there's a bit of a contradiction in its position to the UK Home Affairs Parliamentary Committee, at least from my searches on Google. And YouTube maintained that the video did not meet the test for removal under its guidelines, and emphasized that it was in favor of free expression and access to information, though there had to be a balance. And YouTube said that as an organization, they have a bias towards free expression, and here is in relation to a video by a known white supremacist who claims that Jews want to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, Americans, and Europeans. The other second example is again on YouTube, in relation to a neo-Nazi organization known as National Action, right-wing neo-Nazi group that is proscribed and forbidden in the UK. The Metropolitan Police Counter-Terror Chief Mark Rowley describes the National Action Group as a homegrown, proscribed, white supremacist neo-Nazi terror group which seeks to plan attacks and build international networks, unquote. And the National Action promoted and encouraged acts of terrorism after the brutal murder of Joe Cox. And it posted messages after the murder such as, I quote, "Our thoughts go out to Thomas Meyer, the murderer of Joe Cox." And again, another quote was, "Only 649 members of parliament to go," unquote. 15 months after the national action was proscribed by the UK government, and 12 months after the Home Affairs Committee raised this with YouTube, a national action video could still be found on YouTube's platform on 4 separate channels just a few days ago, 7th of March 2018. And this video was a 2016 video of a white supremacist speech at a national action demonstration in Darlington, the US. But this is not just a video that randomly just remained there. The UK Parliament had explicitly requested that the video of a proscribed UK organization be taken off. And so in March of last year, 2017, the Home Affairs Select Committee contacted YouTube to ask why this video was still available, even though the organization was forbidden by government a year before, December 2016. On 14th of March 2017, the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs at Google, Mr. Peter Barron, told the committee that it had now been removed because it was representing an illegal organization, and therefore the content was illegal. On 17th of March, 3 days later, Member of Parliament Yvette Cooper, who's the committee chairperson, wrote again to Mr. Barron as they were still able to find the same video on YouTube. And in its response on the 30th of March, Mr. Barron replied to say that national action videos have been blocked. And I quote, "As a proscribed terrorist organization, we blocked their channel as soon as we were notified, and we blocked videos that invite support for national action, including the ones flagged to us in your recent letter," unquote. So that's the 30th of March. On the 26th of June, the committee chairman, Ms. Cooper, met again with the vice president of Google Public Policy, where she once again raised the fact that national action propaganda video and the fact that it had not been properly banned from YouTube's platform. A month later, on 27th of July, Ms. Cooper met the chief executive of YouTube, Ms. Susan Wojcicki, if I'm not got it right, where Ms. Cooper again showed her this same video, which was still available on particular YouTube channels, and called on YouTube to use its own search engines and technology to find the video everywhere on the platform and to remove it. Unfortunately, on the 27th of October 2017, Ms. Cooper again, this is the UK Parliament, felt obliged to write to Mr. Barron as national action videos were still accessible on YouTube. In the letter, she requested that all national action material be removed as a matter of urgency, such as from today, unquote. On 15th of November, she again had to meet the senior vice president of Google, Mr. Ken Walker, where he told her that action had been taken to prevent the video from being shown. But in that same office, Ms. Cooper showed that the video was still available on YouTube. On 19th of December, at the Home Affairs Select Committee evidence session, the Vice President of Public Policy Google was asked why it had taken 8 months to completely remove the video from YouTube. And the answer given was that, I think similar to Facebook's response, that this was disappointing and that we're learning, and that as Google has started to roll out machine learning in the last 6 months, we have improved. So again, the same theme about the rhetoric of being good, responsive, and responsible partners. But in relation to the UK, their experience is also something that we look at with concern, being a much smaller jurisdiction. Here we have the United States and the United Kingdom not getting responses from companies on social media. And so Singapore is looking at action or inaction. And so this is again tied to my earlier point, that even in clear-cut cases, there has been inaction. And that's a cause of worry. So if you may comment on that, and maybe YouTube may want to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I won't comment on specific YouTube things. For the record, I've never seen any of these videos that you're talking about, and don't really want to. But I think it really goes back to the whole thing around building an informed community and digital literacy, because everything you just described I have no interest in, and I think I'm a relatively informed guy when it comes to recognizing a DOF or something I just don't want to see. But I do think that there's a lot of learning, not only from industry, but from citizens and from academics and journalists as well. And I think that that's why the whole idea of collaborating and sharing knowledge and perspectives is an important one, because it is, as I said, a very recent thing and a very kind of evolving thing to deal with DOFs. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you. I turn now to your segment of your submission, where you encourage us to look at companies self-regulating, that companies will put in measures and they'll continue to improve. Again, linked to what I said earlier about there being egregious cases in the Western media that cause Singapore to be concerned about whether there is indeed that commitment. I just want to ask you about the concept of self-regulation by social media companies. I will bring your attention to an article on time.com. I give you the article, but basically I'm relying on the point. It's a philosophical point and an important one. This article is entitled Disinformation is Becoming Unstoppable, 24th of January 2018 on time.com. The authors are Ben Scott and Dipayan Ghosh, two journalists. And I quote, the latent power of disinformation operations conducted over the leading internet platforms lies in the implicit alignment of interests between platform, such as companies like Facebook and Google, and advertiser, which is how those companies make much of their money. The platform collects data, that means your companies collect data about your users, organizes them into like-minded audiences with shared preferences, and sells those groups aggregated attention to advertisers. If users engage with a commercial message, both advertiser and the platform benefit, including if the advertiser is a propagandist. This market paradigm encourages a subtle and unwitting alignment. These sites sustain themselves by finding like-minded groups and selling information about their behavior. Disinformation propagators sustain themselves by manipulating the behavior of like-minded groups. Until this system is restructured, it's unlikely political disinformation operations can be stopped or even slowed. That rebuilding would be enormously difficult, since digital advertising is absolutely central to internet commerce. But it is essential. We rely at our peril on a news marketplace that is designed to serve the advertiser rather than the citizen, unquote. So I'm not just citing the article for what the authors say, but I think it's a valid concern that when AIC says that your companies would like to take steps on your own without the need for regulation or any external involvement by governments, that they describe the way in which the market is structured. The alignment is between the platform, the way you've structured your commercial interests, and the advertisers who advertise with you because of your ability, unique ability as a social media company to identify and segmentize people based on their propensities, their interests, their afflictions, so on and so forth. So perhaps we could just address that squarely and let us know whether you feel that regulation is honestly held, or whether it is better done with government, with national security agencies, conversing with you about what you do and what we should do to help you and I and everyone else deal with the threat that DOF will continue to pose in the years ahead.
Sure. I guess, first of all, I want to say the word self sounds very lonely. So I guess when I mean self, I mean in that collaborative kind of group setting where we include academia, journalists, policymakers, government, and other parties. As I said, I attended a meeting a few weeks back where we had people from all walks of life, whether it be industry. We didn't have any government there, but we did have people from various universities. We had people from various industries. And I guess what I see from all the member companies is a lot of resources and a lot of commitment to actually fighting DOFs and combating them in a sense that they want to try and work in that collaborative nature rather than be just regulated immediately and have legislation applied immediately. So I think that's what I mean by when I say self-regulatory organization or self-regulatory. I don't mean it to be one company. I don't even mean it to be the 10 companies that are AIC members. I mean it to be that collaborative group that I mentioned.
And you mean also governments playing a part
Yes.
through whatever means, whether regulatory or by guidelines or whatever, or education?
I think you'd be a very important stakeholder.
Thank you. One of the reasons why you're concerned about legislation is that social media companies do not want to be arbiters of fact, truth versus falsehood, whether it's a matter of expediency or resourcing, or whether it's an objection to being asked to be a judge of information, and that you're merely a platform and not a media company. I like to tackle that point. So AIC says that the companies, and we've heard everyone here say that you don't have policies that require you to judge. You'd rather not judge. But yet, all of you are taking steps, quite rightly, to try to tackle DOF. But the way in which you tackle DOF is not to tackle it at source, which is whether it's true or false, but you want to rely on external algorithms using machine learning to kind of sense whether this is low quality, and low quality likely means false. If it's bad, strange behavior, it's possibly a bot, and certain kinds of bot behavior suggests malice, and therefore possibly DOF. But my point earlier, and I think you all won't disagree with me, is that using AI, using automation, machine learning, you're trying to look at proxies, and you can be both under-inclusive, that means you don't catch the DOF, and you let a lot go through, or it can be over-inclusive, which means you censor precisely what you're not wanting to censor by being a judge. You don't want to be a judge to censor and stifle, but that's the most clear-cut. Is it right? Is it wrong? Can people furnish it? But you'd rather a situation where you use machines and computers and algorithms to censor without looking at content, but as a result, posing, in fact, greater risks to freedom of speech. Perhaps you could just address that point.
Could I address that?
Maybe I could hear from Mr. Payne first.
One of the key features of a court, of course, there is due process. So a court doesn't just say, okay, we've got an allegation of a DOF, we're just going to decide. A court will have due process. And that's absolutely right, and that's the rule of law.
Yes.
And I suppose that's at the heart of this, is that if we did have a policy that said, DOFs are not allowed on Facebook, we'd also have to provide due process for the poster of that content and the person who's alleging it's a DOF to furnish evidence to us, as a court does. And that would take a lot of time and energy, and we still might not get it right. I'm not suggesting that it's a wrong thing to do, but that's the way we'd have to do it. Unlike, say, when we're making a judgment about hate speech or terrorism or child sexual abuse, all the other areas of policy that we deal with, it's not easy, but generally we are able to use objective evidence to determine that, and we don't need to have that kind of due process. And that's why your characterization of using proxies, machine learning, addressing the what's often the source of this, we think is the right approach. But we know that this is still to be tested. We still don't know. But so it's not that we're trying to abrogate our responsibilities. It's this particular notion of the kind of due process you would require in order to be fair to people in respect of DOFs, that I think is problematic, more problematic for us than other policy areas that we've discussed today.
Mr. Shanmugam, you want to seek a clarification?
Thank you, Mr. Milner. I can't resist following up. As I understand your answer, your objection to being told that something is DOF and required to take it down is not philosophical, there's nothing fundamentally wrong, but you would want some objective process, a process, for example, through a court.
Exactly, because it's not.
I
if we are
understand. Let
told,
me finish.
But if somebody alleges, it's different, isn't it?
Wait. So, and then you say, but then, court process takes time, and by then, of course, the war is over, if it's DOF, because it takes time. So the real answer, taking through what you have said, is some objective process, but we have to find a way in which the time is shortened and speed becomes the essence. That's a logical conclusion of what you've said, correct?
I think that's right if you're going to do a due
Thank
process
you.
route.
I just wanted to follow from my train of thought. But first, I presume Mr. Jeff Payne agrees with what Mr. Milner articulated about my earlier point. You agree?
Yes, I do. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
do.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on Mr. Milner's point? You're concerned about having to arbitrate facts. But even in your other policies, like hate speech, we've seen that you've had the tussle, or Twitter, or YouTube had the tussle with the British Parliament or the British authorities over YouTube's interpretation of what hate speech is and what the British view hate speech within the realms and ambit of the legislation. So even in hate speech, even in violent extremism, even in child sexual predatory behavior, we don't excuse any of these, but I'm saying that like DOF, there's always an umbra and a penumbra. What is clearly black, and what is gray, and what is white. You know, you've accepted in AIC's report submission that there is an egregious realm for which legislation you fully support. It's what the courts have to do in government agencies. But if you're concerned about having to adjudicate, and again, for DOFs, there are what are very clear DOFs, what are clearly debunked DOFs, debunkable DOFs, what are characterizations with a big gray, and where there's opinion, which is, you know, you respect people's opinion, and it cannot be DOF, right? It's just rude or impolite or inaccurate portrayal, right? But it's not a factual dispute. But I dare say that you have policies which allow you to summarily remove content. And some of it you use machines. And I'm not sure whether your policies provide for that due process. If you do, then why can't you provide the same for DOF? And that's where I have a bit of difficulty understanding a consistency in all your approaches, including AIC's.
I understand that we're searching for the granular here. But actually, when it comes to, for instance, issues of terrorism, because we have very clear policies, we don't allow prescribed terrorist organizations to have a presence on Facebook. And we go much further than the law in most countries here in terms of what we allow and don't allow. That enables us to remove terrorist content at a scale and a speed that's unimaginable. So 99% of the content from global terrorist organizations we now remove without anybody reporting it to us, or before it's reported to us. And in 83% of those occasions, we do it within an hour, and often before it's ever appeared. And so but that's because the nature of that content is unequivocal. And we're not going to allow a supporter of ISIS or Al-Qaeda due process. That's not allowed. Whereas I think, and so one of the issues here is, how do you define what's an egregious or deliberate online falsehood in order to say, okay, on this we won't provide due process, but on these we will? And I'm not saying it's therefore impossible, but it just seems incredibly hard to see how we can do that at the scale at which we operate.
Mr.
And
Miller,
that's why the proxies is the right approach.
Let me be very clear that by no means am I discouraging you from carrying on with your very good policies against hate speech, against terrorism and violence and religious extremism. These are very important. There are severe consequences if hate speech or violent and religious extremist information and ideology gets spread. There is, of course, it's not clear-cut. And hate speech, VRE, which is terrorist incitement, can also meld into DOF. And you can use DOF, deliberate online falsehoods, to stir up and cause people to be radicalized. It's false information about what happens in the Middle East, what happens in certain parts of the world. They're false. And if they can be clearly debunked, so it's not a case of gray, it's clear. I'm just struggling because your companies have shown that you are more than corporate entities. You take the responsibility of the safety of your users and the world in which you serve so seriously that you're prepared to remove first because the risk is so dire. And I'm no doubt that you provide in your protocols and policies opportunities for people to come and say, hey, you shouldn't have taken me down. You shouldn't have deleted my handle or my tweet or my Facebook page or my post. Give me a chance to due process to assert my right to free speech and show you that that right is not surrendered by virtue of my dabbling in hate speech or terrorist behavior. So likewise for DOF, I mean, we've articulated earlier, Mr. Sharmagun has brought you through a lot of testimony about DOF being used as a weapon by countries against each other to undermine the social fabric. It's not conventional warfare, kinetic warfare, where you go against uniformed soldiers. You're going against people. You're getting them to hate each other, to hurt each other. You're undermining the society and pulling a rug from under its feet. So I'm just exhorting and saying that perhaps companies should re-examine and rise up to the occasion of the real challenge of DOF, in as much as they've risen to the challenge for hate speech, hate crime, and terrorism. That's all I'm saying, and I just like to, may not need a response, but I just hope you'd accept that. Thank you. I move on to my last point for AIC, which is the point you spoke about earlier, the EC report, the European Commission report on, I quote, fake news initiative. There was communication, and subsequently, as you pointed out, there was a HLEG report just a couple of days earlier, which post-dated your report, but which you believe today is consonant with the approach you're taking. Again, as with your characterization of the adequacy of Singapore's laws, I'm just concerned whether it is based on a proper assessment of the documents and a case of misunderstanding and not a misportrayal of the EC report. Our sense is that the EC communication of last year and the HLEG report of this year, the way in which EIC has characterized it is not as it claims to be. It's a bit more nuanced than that. First, if I may bring you to the communication of the 9th of November 2017. I presume it's November and not American September, the way you've numbered it, but 9th of November, I believe. It says that this is a European communication, EC communication, and it's a roadmap of the Commission's next steps on the issue of fake news, which included assessing the efficacy of measures undertaken so far by market players. You have seen the report, and I don't need to flash it. It stated that the roadmap does not prejudge, I quote, does not prejudge, unquote, the final content of the EC's fake news initiative, and that the Commission was not planning a legislative initiative, I quote, at this stage, unquote. While there was clearly wariness in the communication and the HLEG report about legislation, the question of legislation was not addressed definitively because of the nature of this roadmap and the fact that this is a HLEG, an experts group, and it's not the European Commission itself issuing a determinative position. I would also point out that when I looked at the HLEG report online, you know what the HLEG is within the EU. It's an advisory expert panel, and understandably it was chaired by a Dutch professor specializing in media law and comprised 39 members representing academia, journalists, broadcasters, newspapers, tech companies, civil society and fact-checking organizations, and understandably none from governments, state governments, or from the Commission itself. That has to be so. And the 12th March report, HLEG report, entitled Multi-Dimensional Approach to Disinformation, left open the question of regulation even though they were uncomfortable. It proposed the following steps. Number one, try out a self-regulatory approach. Number two, evaluate the approach. And number three, determine in the spring of 2019 whether further measures, including regulatory interventions, would be needed. This is at page 31. And therefore, just for some nuance, I'd like to ask if you agree that AIC's characterization of the EC's position, the European Commission, is not as AIC had pointed out.
I think what we were trying to convey with our submission was that this HLEG was currently doing a report looking at different approaches to DOFs. And when the report came out on March 12th last week, or I guess a little bit longer, you know, a lot of the core principles, they came out with 5 core principles that they thought and recommended based at that time. And those principles are very aligned to the principles that we called out in our submission, being not a self-regulated, but a multi-stakeholder model approach to DOFs. So I think it's encouraging. Again, I think that it's still very much an evolving space. So the fact that I think the 5th principle was to continue doing research and to measure the effectiveness of that research, I think that's promising. I also think it's promising to have a panel of such 39 experts looking at this, because if you look at the mainstream media and the way things have been characterized, you know, as a guy who's less than 50 but close to it, I have to say that I've never seen a more polarized world, not only politically in America, I'm Canadian, but in the press as well, because it's very, you know, I could pick up a certain paper and read a very biased or a one-way way of thinking. So I think it's encouraging to see this high-level expert group looking at this, and we should continue to work along those lines. And it's, you know, as some of the member companies have expressed here today, they're working with some of those people in that high-level expert group.
Short, you having heard my description of the EC communication that the AIC report referred to, and the proper characterization of the HLEG's constitution and its recommendations, that it is not as articulated in your one-liner in the AIC report or written submission, that the European Commission does not recommend legislation, but that it is as per what I've just read out earlier.
Yeah, the HLEG, I think they came out with their findings on March 12th.
Thank you very much. I think
Thanks.
I appreciate that. So I'll yield back to Chairman. Thank you.
Ms. Chia?
Thank you, gentlemen, ladies, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. A couple of very quick questions. I think, Mr. Payne, you mentioned on page 4 of your submission that the members of your the coalition have developed robust measures, right? And would it be correct to say that the robust measures that you're referring to would include the proactive actions that you've listed on pages 6 and 7?
Yes, I would, because in large organizations, sometimes to get the momentum to make things happen takes a long time. And I think given the relatively, you know, young or new phase of DOFs, I think that the fact that mostly all the members here today, mostly a lot of members and all the members here today have already put in programs in place and looking at different alternative methods of identifying effective solutions.
Thank you. And what would happen if there were a breach of those standards by any of your member companies?
Well, I won't comment specifically on any individual company, but I think the programs and initiatives that they have in place, whether it be continuously looking at their community guidelines and rules and policies, and building these new alliances with education and media outlets, I think these are things that are currently taking place. As we've heard here tonight, many of the things are just off the press, or we're now doing this and that. So I think, to be fair, the companies have mobilized the necessary people and budgets within their organizations to start really effectively driving solutions for this space.
Yes, indeed. So essentially what we are doing here is that we are being asked to place our faith in in technology companies to do what is right by society. Is my understanding correct?
I feel absolutely that all of these companies are working with good intentions to collaborate with government and the other stakeholders I've mentioned, and they all mean to do well. And I think there's a learning process going on for not only governments, but also the companies and the other stakeholders that we want to bring into the fold.
Yes, and indeed, I think that, as my other panelists have emphasized, we're looking to work in partnership with all of you. So I don't want to have an element of distrust, but I do have to emphasize that when we're dealing with issues of national security, when we're dealing with issues of race, language, and religion, I think that there is a lot more at stake than just a question of whether or not I have a right to put up a post. And I think, by the way, freedom of speech has got nothing to do with propagating falsehood. So I think we all agreed that it is not correct for any of us to be able to claim the right to speak freely if I exercised that right, so to speak, to harm or to damage another person. So that was why I asked about this point on self-regulation, because ultimately, if there are divergent interests between members of the group, or between members of the group and the community, then the question is how that tension is to be resolved. And I also understand that, we're worried about any undue limitation on the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I can tell you that we are too, because we don't want to clamp freedom of speech. It is unhealthy for our community. But having said that, history does not give me a lot of confidence. We had another paper that was submitted to us by, let me just refer to that paper. Sorry, thank you. By a professor and the chairman of the computer science of Dartmouth College. That's in submission number 17. Now, he wrote about the difficulties that they had in getting the technology coalition together to fight child pornography distribution, and that was in between 2003 and 2008. This is what he said. Between 2003 and 2008, however, the technology coalition, of which the various companies here represented are members, did not develop or deploy any effective solution to disrupt the global distribution of child pornography. The problem in the intervening 5 years only worsened until a particular technology called photo-DNA was developed. Then he went on to say that from that experience with fighting online child exploitation, he partnered with the CEP to address the troubling online recruitment and radicalization of extremists and the resulting devastating consequences in the form of attacks around the world. He referred, of course, to the horrific aftermath of the extremist misuse of the internet and social media platforms stretching from Paris to Brussels to Beirut, Cairo, and beyond. Then he says, since 2014, CEP, along with government agencies around the world, has been calling on technology companies and social media in particular to rein in the ability of extremists to recruit, radicalize, plan, and execute attacks. The response, largely denial and inaction, has been eerily similar to the call in early 2000 to combat online child exploitation. That's his submission given to the committee. In addition to what my other colleagues have shared, I think these are two other examples which does not give to us confidence. And so, would you like to address that?
I'd really like to come in on this. I do apologise, but that is absolutely wrong and completely unfair for him to say that. We have provided evidence to you about what we're doing on the issue of deliberate online falsehoods. If you'd like us to provide information about all the work our companies have done over the last several years to combat terrorism and radicalisation, we can do that and absolutely prove to you that his evidence is fundamentally wrong. He's got a particular axe to grind about his form of technology, and he's absolutely wrong on this. And if you look at what a number of different governments have said around the world about including the European Commission, about the work that we have done collectively to address this problem, you will find a very different answer. I'm very happy to provide that, but I really want to be, in no uncertain terms, tell you that his evidence is wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Milner. So therefore, in relation, coming back again to the unfortunate Facebook example, that if not for the media exposure and all the other articles, are you saying that Facebook would nonetheless have taken the step forward to make necessary disclosures to your subscribers?
Actually, of course, in terms, I like the way you phrase it, the unfortunate Facebook event, I think is how you described it. I've answered lots of questions about that, where our CEO has been very clear that we should have acted differently in respect of our users. It's been a breach of trust, and we've got a lot of work to do to redeem that situation. But that does not mean that, therefore, what I've just told you in respect of combating terrorism is untrue, and we will absolutely provide you with chapter and verse on that if you wish to have it, in order to demonstrate to you. Do not just take my word for it here, and as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. This is something I've the team of people who work on this in our company do incredible work, and I've had a massive impact on the ability of these heinous individuals to try and distribute this content on our platforms, and that's true of the other companies here. And I just really want to make it, I just want to, despite what's happened to us in the last few days and what's come to light, I don't want you to go to be left with any doubt that might also apply here. It absolutely does not.
Thank you. And so just one last question in relation to the concern about having to adjudicate on the veracity of any posting or content. So if you are not the ones who have to adjudicate, for example, if there is an executive order for you to take down and there is recourse for you to appeal, then that is not going to be greatly objectionable? Or, I mean, any one of the companies can answer that question. Yeah, of course, you too, Mr. Mueller.
I'm happy for others if they'd like to.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite understood that last question, Ms. Chair. Could you please repeat it?
So instead of imposing an obligation on you to make an assessment and take down, assume that we come to you with an executive order to say, take this down. So therefore, the judgment call is not made by you, but you have a course for appeal to the courts after you have taken it down. Is that also an option?
Without knowing the specifics, it's impossible to answer that question. And one of the reasons is that we have so many different mechanisms and levers with which we address the question of content being taken down. Not only do we have product interventions, not only do we have technological ones, we have policies as well, and we also have the ability for other people to report. Speaking for Twitter, because we're such an open platform, we have the ability for users to report, for witnesses to report, for bystanders to report, and that's before we get to the discussion of how quickly a myth is debunked on such an open platform, or the value of a conversation where getting to a truth, where something might be insulting or insidious or rude, on the trajectory of becoming or potentially being violent, and seeing that counteracted, as we so often do every day on our platform. So I think the technical question of how to cooperate when we already have and would strongly, hope that we could continue the collaboration that we already have. We have direct and dedicated lines of contact available to work with the Singaporean authorities. We treasure and have a very good and positive and robust relationship with the authorities. We have dedicated channels for reporting. We have the ability to work 24/7 around the clock in any emergency. So I think our suggestion, and if I could submit for all of us here who are members of the AIC, I think that we would ask that there be perhaps some consideration, or even perhaps us providing additional technical information if it's helpful, to paint the full picture of the spectrum of levers available with which such content could be addressed. It is not singularly addressed as an AI issue or an ML issue or a human issue. It's a combination of all of these things together. And so we have a range of different ways that we work legally with the Singaporean government and the ways in which we comply and respect local law. So I'm not quite sure it's easy to answer that question in and of itself without a particular case study and frankly some better experts than myself to speak to such a particular case, such as someone from our trust and safety team, our user services team, or our legal policy team.
Thank you. We look forward to your further cooperation. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Rahayu?
Thank you. Thank you to the all of you for your patience and for candidly answering our questions. Actually, most of my questions have been addressed by the earlier answers, but I just have a few things I wanted to clarify. I think in respect of, actually in particular with regards to the paper put up by Facebook, there was reference to the panel of experts that you have to adjust or really look at your community standards. I just wanted to understand, in particular with regards to the different languages used in Singapore and the content that's being spread in different languages, because one of the other experts who had come in had explained to us that the nuance in a certain language could also cause vulnerabilities, especially say with the elderly, in certain languages. I'm just wondering what is the capability of your team in dealing with that issue and how you address that, and knowing, a certain type of profile will be more easily susceptible to deliberate falsehood. So do you actually understand and read the content fully? Because you have different types of things floating around and you also have comments from that. So that's one question. The other one, I just wanted to fully appreciate a little bit more this concern, probably something that's also echoed around along the table, in as far as what is this real concern about the legislation if, let's say, we do put in law? I mean, again, it's hypothetical. If we do put in something, we're really considering all options. And I think the fact that you've actually put in all efforts is something we really appreciate. And educating the public, increasing media literacy, it's something that's very important and something that we'll continue to do. But what we see is that it's going to take some time for people to reach to that level of understanding and appreciating. But this thing about deliberate online falsehoods is that the effect is quick, it's immediate, it's already happening, and that scares us. There's already discussions about the slow drip effect, the drip drip effect, things that are already around and creating certain notions among the public. So I just want to understand, what is the concern if there is a real and calibrated approach to where, when we put in the executive order or an instruction say this is something that you need to put down, but you have that due process to actually subsequently clarify the situation. What is your concern? And in particular with regards to the paragraph that you said, Mr. Tan, in the Facebook description, that you believe in the need to adopt an innovative and iterative approach, as prescriptive legislation and requirements would make it harder for us and other online platforms to find the right technical solutions, consumer messaging, and policies to address this shared challenge. What is your fear of the legislation circumscribing your efforts in trying to make things better?
Thank you, Ms. Mazam, for your questions. I think the first question with regards to whether we have the contextual capability and the language capability, I would say yes. We have 24/7 coverage around the world. Our community operations teams are schooled in multiple languages, I think about 70 to 80 different languages, including English, Mandarin, Malay, Bahasa Melayu, and Tamil here. And when they look at content that is flagged to us, they will look at that within that context, within that language. And if there's a necessity to escalate higher up the channels, they will do so to provide that further context. Should some of the content be taken down either erroneously, there is recourse to replace and reinstate those content. For your second question as to whether what, if any, we are afraid of legislation, I think we have said multiple times in this panel that we welcome a whole suite of measures. And this includes, as you had rightly pointed out, we have invested a lot in media literacy. We have looked at policies, processes, but also on products. when I had, in our submission, when we talked about how, legislative requirements around our approach to false news, that's page, second last page, paragraph 3, what we're saying is that based upon our internal tests, for example, and I raised the point about the disputed flags, we're just trying to make the point that a lot of these tests are iterative. They're iterative, they inform us on whether some things will work, some things won't work, and we are concerned that if legislation is too prescriptive, it may be difficult to tweak these measures within that. So obviously we will work together closely with the panel and the legislative arm of government to think about more ways in which these could be a little bit more flexible and attuned to the rapidly evolving nature of DOFs.
Mr. Sia.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's been a long day. Just a quick question to Mr. Payne. I just refer you to page 4 of your written submission, second last para. You talked about, let me just read. Given the vastness of the internet, most internet companies have thus developed proven notice and takedown processes that rely on blah, blah, blah. Given what you've heard, and I'm in fact particularly disturbed by the fact that in the case of YouTube, that in UK, it took 8 months, even though specific instructions have been given, for a certain video to be finally removed. Given what you've heard today, do you think that what you put in there, in that report, not quite proven, and certainly not very effective? What's your comment?
I don't have all the individual statistics from each of the member companies, but I would say that they have developed these content takedown procedures. Things may still slip through the cracks. As I said, it's not a perfect situation we're at right now, and it's still evolving. So they have the policies in place, which I think is encouraging, and I think we heard from everyone here today that they're still working on new things and new initiatives on how to address DOFs.
But is it fair to say it's not very proven and certainly not very effective?
Well, again, I don't have the stats, so if that's one, we had a couple of examples shared here today, but if that's a couple of examples that are just the outliers, then it may be, I think we need the hard numbers behind them.
Thank you.
Mr. Payne, you've said a couple of times that deliberate online falsehoods are new. Deliberate falsehoods are as old as history. Would you agree?
Yeah, I said deliberate online falsehoods.
What is different today is that a very small number of internet giants control platforms through which a lot of communications take place. They are, as it were, the infrastructure. And within that infrastructure, flow of information, there is a lot of DOFs, there is a lot of hate speech from our perspective, and there is a lot of things going on which seek to divide societies, undermine societies. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, we've heard a lot of broad statements from all of you, and I'm sure you mean it, every word of it, on how you're improving all the time, how you're incredibly proactive, how serious you are about it, and we welcome that. What gives maybe a little bit of pause is what we see on the record. The types of cases, illustrations I've taken you through, others have taken you through, what the UK Parliament has gone through, what has been gone through with the US Congress. Whenever it comes to specifics, then we look at the specific areas, specific points, and the answers don't seem quite satisfactory. I'm not asking you to comment. I'm just giving you a perspective. Let me give you just one illustration because it's been a long day. I'll show you a cartoon right now, which was on Twitter. This was a cartoon on Twitter. This was the subject of a question in the UK Parliament to Twitter. Twitter refused to take this down. And the reason it refused to take it down is that this was not in breach of Twitter's hateful conduct policy. If this is not in breach of a hateful conduct policy, I find it difficult to understand what else can be. So the various beautiful statements you make, Mr. Payne, and others, have to be tested against the reality. As it is, this is where the rubber hits the road. And for us in Singapore, this is way beyond what we will tolerate. And I'm not even sure that this may come within the policy of the other platforms here to take down. So that is just to put a perspective that while we listen to a lot of statements, we have to get back to what you actually do. I've made that point a number of times to Mr. Milner as to why I wanted to look at what was said in the US Congress, why I wanted to see what was said in the UK Parliament. These are the reasons. So for us as a multiracial society, where we are very strict about what is said, putting up something like this about Muslims will be completely unacceptable as a matter of law. And if the law does not cover this, then we will have to have law that covers this. And no amount of protestation that self-regulation will be enough is going to wash. This is not much of a question. It is more to give you my perspective. But if you have a viewpoint, either yourself or Twitter, you are welcome to respond. But I was quite shocked to read in the transcript the response that this does not contravene our takedown policy on hate speech. This is why the Facebook executive Chakraborty talks about social media at its worst corrodes democracy. When you have this, how do you have a proper debate between two sides on immigration, for example? Because this is guttural. It aims at your gut. Facts and logic matter no longer. And it's very difficult for social media companies then to portray themselves as champions of free speech. This has got nothing to do with free speech. Thank you. Do you want to answer on behalf of Twitter?
I'm unfamiliar with the specifics of this particular case or posting, but I just wanted to clarify, which UK testimony were you referring to, Minister? Sorry.
Notes. I'll give it to you. This was question number 438 in the, I think it was given either in the Select Committee hearing in February or the Home Affairs Committee meeting in last year. I will get that. Sorry, it is now there, flashed up. Question 438. And it contained a hashtag deport all Muslims with a very disturbing graphic cartoon that's clearly designed to alarm and distress. It does not breach our community standards. And you look at the answer. So we have to come back to the reality beyond broad statements. That was the answer given in the United Kingdom. And I'm not even sure, as I said, that any of the other platforms will say this breaches their standards. I don't know. Based on the answers given today, I don't know. So, thank you very much.
Okay, as there are no further questions, I would like to thank all the witnesses very much for the long hours they have spent here with us. Okay, we will be sending you a transcript of today's events. If there are any inaccuracies or if you need minor amendments, please do the corrections and return the transcripts to us. Once again, thank you very much.
For the record, it was the Home Affairs Committee in March 2017. Thank you.
Thank you.
Clerk of Parliament. Yeah. Could the next witnesses please come to the witness table?